welcome. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Or, I might show up at your door. I'm just here to share some creepy stories, so sit back and enjoy. Disclaimer: the content presented in the video is purely for entertainment purposes only. The theories and stories discussed in this video are speculative and are not supported by any evidence or proof. Viewer discretion is advised. Urban Lens STL blog posted by Marcus Webb, April 30th, 2025, 7:43 a.m. I've been photographing St. Louis architecture for 6 years now. Every landmark, every forgotten corner, every changing shadow across our cityscape. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what I witnessed this morning. The Gateway Arch is gone. Let me back up. I woke at 5:15 a.m. to catch the sunrise behind the arch, something I do the last Tuesday of every month like clockwork. The forecast promised clear skies after yesterday's thunderstorms, perfect for capturing that moment when the early light catches the stainless steel. I packed my usual gear, Canon R5, both my wide-angle and telephoto lenses, tripod, and the thermos of black coffee that keeps me functional at ungodly hours. The Mississippi was calm when I reached the riverfront, silvery in the pre-dawn light. A few joggers and early shift workers dotted the pathways, but otherwise I had the viewing area to myself. I set up my favorite spot northeast of the arch grounds, framing the 630-foot monument against the lightning sky, waiting for that perfect moment when my phone blared with an emergency alert at exactly 5:42 a.m. Emergency alert, anomaly detected, downtown. Avoid Gateway Arch National Park area. Remain indoors. Further instructions pending. I looked up from my phone, confused, and that's when I noticed. Where the Gateway Arch should have dominated the skyline, there was nothing. Not rubble, not empty ground, just a perfect arch-shaped absence against the dawn sky. Like someone had taken an enormous cookie cutter to reality itself. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes. The negative space remained. "Are you seeing this?" I called to a jogger who had stopped nearby, staring at the skyline. She nodded, her face pale in the growing light. "It's just gone," she whispered. My photographer's instincts kicked in before my brain could process what was happening. I started shooting wide-angle captures of the skyline with its unnatural gap, telephoto zooms of where the base foundations should be. Through my viewfinder, I could see people gathering at the security fences surrounding the park, pointing and shouting. Then the sirens started. The wail of emergency vehicles converged downtown as I continued documenting. Within minutes, police cruisers blocked off the streets leading to the arch grounds. Officers with megaphones ordered spectators to clear the area. My hands trembled as I kept shooting, the camera's mechanical click grounding me in reality as my mind struggled to comprehend what my eyes were seeing. At 6:14 a.m., another emergency alert. Emergency alert, National Guard activated, mandatory evacuation of downtown STL in effect. Tune to local news for evacuation routes. By then, news helicopters hovered overhead. I overhead fragments of shouted conversations, theories ranging from terrorist attacks to sinkholes to meteor strikes, but none of them made sense. How does something that massive disappear without sound, without debris? There was just absence. I kept shooting until an officer forced me back, establishing a wider perimeter. As I retreated, I noticed something that sent ice through my veins. The emptiness where the arch had stood wasn't just empty air. It was darker somehow. Light seemed to bend around its edges, creating a subtle distortion visible only at certain angles. Through my telephoto lens, I could see scientists in hazmat suits cautiously approaching the perimeter of the void, extending instruments that I couldn't identify. Back at my apartment, I've been glued to the news and scanning social media. The official statements are saying nothing of substance, investigating an incident, structural anomaly, no immediate public health threat identified, the usual government non-answers. But unofficial channels are wild with speculation and reports of electronics malfunctioning near the site. My own photos show something the news cameras aren't capturing, that subtle darkness, that wrong emptiness where our city's icon stood for nearly 60 years. Update 10:17 a.m. They've established a 2-mile exclusion zone around the former Arch grounds. Downtown has become a ghost town except for emergency vehicles and what appear to be military transport trucks. I tried calling Corinne at the emergency management office, but all circuits are busy. She hasn't responded to texts either. A third emergency alert just came through. Emergency alert, stay clear of downtown. Communications disruption possible. Conserve cell phone battery. Maintain household supplies for 72 hours. The local news is reporting that federal officials are en route. FEMA, Department of Energy, even NASA representatives for a missing monument. Something isn't adding up. I'm hearing rumors that other smaller objects have disappeared within the vicinity of the Arch grounds. A hot dog stand, a section of pavement, even a park maintenance vehicle. None of this is confirmed, but multiple social media accounts report the same details. Update: दोपहर के 12:38. I couldn't stay away. I know it was stupid, but I'm a photographer and this is the story of a lifetime. I took my bike down to the edge of the exclusion zone where I found a growing crowd of onlookers held back by National Guard troops. The mood was tense, a mix of fear, confusion, and that peculiar excitement that comes with witnessing something unprecedented. From my vantage point on a parking garage roof nearby, I managed to get some telephoto shots of the void. The photos are disturbing in ways I can't fully articulate. Where the arch should be is a perfect negative silhouette against the sky, but it's not simply empty air. It's as if that section of reality is missing, a hole in the world itself. The edges shimmer slightly, like heat rising from asphalt, but colder somehow, darker. I watched as specialized equipment was unloaded from unmarked trucks. A team in advanced protective gear moved around the perimeter of the void, placing what looked like sensors or markers. Near the base of where the arch once stood, I could see Dr. Eleanor Vega. I recognized her from a documentary on quantum physics last year, directing the scientific response. Her expression, even from this distance, was not reassuring. As I was photographing, a National Guard helicopter flew too close to the empty arch shape. My blood froze as its rotor blades entered the edge of the void and vanished. Just stopped existing where they intersected with the nothingness. The helicopter spun wildly before the pilot regained control and retreated. I've never seen anything like it. The void didn't damage the rotor, it simply erased the portion that entered its space. An officer spotted me soon after and escorted me out of the area. He wouldn't answer questions, but I overheard someone mention antimatter containment protocols on his radio. Antimatter? That can't be right. Antimatter annihilates on contact with normal matter, releasing enormous energy. There was no explosion when the arch vanished. No radiation that I know of. Just absence. I'm uploading these images now, though some of them look corrupted in strange ways. The closer I zoom to the void, the more digital artifacts appear in the files. It's as if the emptiness itself can't be properly captured or rendered. Something fundamental has happened to our city, to reality itself. And I can't shake the feeling that the vanishing of the arch is only the beginning. The sirens haven't stopped wailing since dawn. I'll update when I know more if the networks stay up. In the meantime, if anyone reading this has scientific background or information about what's happening, please contact me. And if you're in St. Louis, heed the evacuation orders. Something tells me we haven't seen the worst of whatever this is. Stay safe. Marcus Webb, Urban Lens, STL. Comments disabled by Emergency Communications Act. Urban Lens, STL blog, posted by Marcus Webb, May 1st, 2025, 10:22 a.m. It's been 28 hours since the arch vanished. Sleep has been impossible, the city is vibrating with tension, and the rational explanations we desperately crave aren't coming. I finally heard from Corinne last night, a brief text saying she's involved in response coordination and can't talk. 4 years since our breakup, but she still reached out. That alone tells me how serious this is. She knows I live downtown, knows I wouldn't evacuate like the authorities are urging, always could read me like a book. Around 3 a.m., while the city tried to sleep under the constant drone of helicopters, another emergency alert jolted everyone awake. Emergency alert, exclusion zone expanded to 3 miles from arch site. Mandatory evacuation. Checkpoints established on all major roads. Present ID for zone access. I live just outside the new perimeter. From my apartment window, I can see the military blockade 2 blocks away, concrete barriers, armored vehicles, soldiers with rifles checking credentials of essential personnel entering the zone. The Mississippi riverfront, usually bustling with tourists and riverboats, now resembles a war zone. But it's what I saw at dawn that compelled me to write this update. I slipped out before sunrise, using the surface passages between buildings I've mapped during years of urban photography. The pre-dawn darkness provided just enough cover to reach the rooftop of the Federal Reserve Bank building. From 12 stories up, I had an unobstructed view of where the arch once stood. The void hasn't disappeared. It's grown. The arch-shaped emptiness has expanded outward by what I estimate to be 30 feet in all directions, and it's not alone anymore. 3 smaller voids, perfect geometric shapes, have appeared nearby: a sphere where a fountain stood in Keener Plaza, a cylindrical absence where the old courthouse dome should be, and something angular and complex where the Eagleton Federal Courthouse Tower jutted into the skyline. The smaller voids pulse subtly, contracting and expanding by inches in slow, rhythmic movements. Even from my distant vantage point, looking at them directly made me queasy, as if my eyes couldn't properly process what they were seeing, or rather, not seeing. Scientific equipment now surrounds the original void, portable generators powering arrays of instruments. The teams move with practiced precision, but their body language betrays their fear. I witnessed one researcher extend a mechanical arm holding what appeared to be a sensor into the edge of the void. The device vanished precisely at the boundary, the severed arm retracting immediately as researchers scrambled to record data. No explosion, no sound, just deletion from existence. I managed to capture nearly 100 photos before the increasing daylight forced me to retreat. Something strange happened when reviewing them at home. Each shot of the voids appears subtly different. In some, the edges look knife-sharp, in others they blur and shimmer. Some show the voids as absolute blackness, others reveal a subtle iridescence like oil on water. These aren't camera errors, it's as if the phenomena themselves resist consistent documentation. Update: दोपहर के 3:47. The government has stopped pretending this is a conventional emergency. A joint statement from the Department of Energy, FEMA, and an unnamed scientific task force was broadcast an hour ago. The events in St. Louis represent an unprecedented physical anomaly. Current evidence suggests localized disruptions in the standard matter composition of affected areas. These disruptions appear stable but are exhibiting gradual expansion patterns. There is no indication of radiation release or conventional explosive threat. Citizens are reminded that entering the exclusion zone is prohibited by federal order. Further updates will be provided as analysis continues. Translated from bureaucrat speak, they have no idea what's happening, but they know it's getting worse. Social media is being actively suppressed. Posts about the anti-zones, as people are calling them, are disappearing almost as quickly as they're uploaded. Official channels claim this is to prevent panic and combat misinformation. But I've been a journalist long enough to recognize a cover-up in progress. I've moved my blog to a private server and encrypted connections. If this post suddenly ends, you'll know why. Update: Sham ke 6:16. Just received this from an anonymous source at the Emergency Operations Center, someone who knows my connection to Corinne. Observer 6 reporting localized gravitational anomalies in proximity to void perimeters. Instruments record negative mass signatures. Repeat, negative mass. Theory suggests matter-antimatter boundary conditions without annihilation energy release. Expansion rate calculated at 0.37 meters per hour. Recommend immediate allocation of quantum containment resources. Eyes-only umbra clearance. I'm not a physicist, but negative mass sounds like something from science fiction. Could these voids be regions where the fundamental properties of matter have somehow inverted? Spaces where physical laws operate in reverse? My source included a partial spectroscopic analysis that I don't fully understand, but one line is highlighted: complete absence of standard model particle signatures. These aren't just empty spaces, they're absences of reality itself. Update: Raat ke 8:32. A new emergency alert, the tone different this time, a low pulsing wail that made the hair on my arms stand up. Emergency alert, unusual weather patterns detected near exclusion zone. Take shelter immediately. Secure all windows and doors. Maintain emergency supplies. Do not approach or photograph atmospheric anomalies. The sky outside my window has taken on a strange quality. The setting sun casts shadows that seem slightly off-angle, as if light itself is bending around the city. Above the exclusion zone, clouds spiral in an unnatural formation, a perfect logarithmic curve centered exactly where the arch once stood. I just watched a flock of birds approach the perimeter of this weather system and abruptly change direction in perfect unison, as if encountering an invisible wall. My phone rang 10 minutes ago. Unknown number. When I answered, I heard what sounded like my own voice, distorted and echoing, speaking words I couldn't understand. Then Karen's voice cut in, crystal clear: "Marcus, don't trust the alerts. They're not coming from us anymore." I tried calling back. The number doesn't exist. The lights in my apartment building have been flickering for the past hour. Outside, military vehicles move through the streets with increasing urgency. A convoy of unmarked black trucks pass by, bearing equipment I've never seen before, massive cylindrical devices that hum audibly even through closed windows. The scientific teams have a theory, I'm certain of it, but they're not sharing it with the public. As night falls, I can see something new from my window. The darkness around the anti-zone seems deeper than natural night, a perfect absence of light. And within that unnatural darkness, I swear I can see movement. Not objects moving through space, but space itself shifting and folding like origami made of night. I've decided to risk entering the exclusion zone tonight. The growing voids, whatever they are rewriting the rules of physics in the heart of St. Louis. If I can get closer images, document the phenomena firsthand, perhaps someone who sees my posts will understand what we're facing. Besides, I need to find Corinne. That call wasn't right. Something's happening to our communications now. If I don't update by morning, tell the authorities to check for me near the old courthouse anti-zone. I'll be the fool with the camera, chasing the story of a lifetime, perhaps the last story. Marcus Webb. Urban Lens STL. Signal integrity 87%, connectivity errors detected. Urban Lens STL blog posted by Marcus Webb, May 2nd, 2025, 4:16 a.m. I'm writing this from the basement of an abandoned coffee shop 3 blocks from the old courthouse void. My hands won't stop shaking. What I've seen tonight defies explanation, contradicts everything we understand about physical reality. Getting past the military cordon was surprisingly easy. The National Guard has established checkpoints on major streets, but they can't cover every alley and service corridor in downtown St. Louis. I used the underground maintenance tunnel connecting the convention center to the Washington Avenue district, a passage I discovered years ago while shooting a piece on the city's subterranean architecture. The exclusion zone feels like a different world. Abandoned vehicles litter the streets, storefronts stand with doors ajar, office towers loom dark against the night sky. The evacuation happened so quickly that signs of interrupted life are everywhere. Half-eaten meals in restaurants, luggage abandoned on sidewalks, a child's teddy bear lying in the middle of an intersection. But it's the silence that unnerves me most. Downtown St. Louis, a place that should buzz with traffic and nightlife, is funeral quiet, except for an odd, low-frequency hum that seems to emanate from everywhere and nowhere at once. A vibration you feel in your molars more than hear. I approached the old courthouse first, keeping to shadows, using parked vehicles as cover whenever helicopter searchlights swept overhead. The cylindrical void that's replaced the building's iconic dome pulses rhythmically, expanding and contracting perhaps 6 inches in diameter every 30 seconds. Perfect mathematical precision. The edges shimmer with what looks like heat distortion, but the air temperature actually drops as you approach. I measured a 15-degree decrease from 1 block away to the police barricade. That's where I saw it happen. A stray cat, lean and gray, slinking along the perimeter fence. The animal approached the barrier, seemingly curious about the void beyond. Nothing unusual until it crossed some invisible threshold about 20 feet from the emptiness. The cat changed. Not all at once, but in patches. Parts of its body seemed to invert, fur becoming negative space, eyes turning into perfect orbs of darkness. The creature yowled, a sound that modulated between normal and something like rewound audio. Then it panicked, sprinting away from the void. I tracked it with my telephoto lens, watching in horror as the inversion spread across its body like ink in water. By the time it reached the end of the block, the cat was more absence than presence, a moving hole in reality shaped like a feline. Then it simply collapsed into itself and was gone. No blood, no remains, just gone. Update 5:43 a.m. I've moved locations after hearing voices approaching. The scientific compound has been established in the former Keener Plaza, surrounding the spherical void where the fountain once stood. From my new vantage point in an office building overlooking the plaza, I can see Dr. Eleanor Vega coordinating teams in specialized protective suits that resemble modified hazmat gear with unusual technical components attached. The equipment they're using defies easy categorization. Devices that project laser grids around the void's perimeter, sensors suspended from carbon fiber poles to avoid direct contact, and what appears to be a modified particle accelerator component mounted on a mobile platform. One machine generates a visible energy field that seems to temporarily stabilize the void's pulsations, freezing its rhythmic expansion for brief intervals. At 5:28 a.m., I witnessed Dr. Vega arguing intensely with a military officer whose insignia identify him as Captain Devin Harris. Even from a distance, their body language conveyed profound disagreement. Harris gestured repeatedly toward a collection of devices being unloaded from armored vehicles, equipment that looked more tactical than scientific. Vega's opposition was clear, but the captain eventually walked away, speaking urgently into his radio. Minutes later, my phone vibrated with another emergency alert, but this one was different. The text was corrupted, glitched in a way I've never seen before, and I wasn't the only one who received it. I watched as scientists below checked their devices in confusion. Several pointed toward the old courthouse void in the distance. That's when I noticed something extraordinary. A faint outline of the missing arch, visible for just seconds as a ghostly afterimage in the dawn light. Not solid, not substantial, but a suggestion of form like a pencil sketch against the sky. Then it was gone again, the void reasserting itself. Something is interfering with my camera now. Every image I take shows strange artifacts, prismatic smears across the frame, inverted color zones, impossible shadows. When I point the lens directly at any void, the viewfinder displays a recursive tunnel effect, as if the camera is photographing its own internal components. I've switched to my phone camera as backup, though the quality is worse. What I'm about to describe was captured in a series of images I'll attempt to upload, though the signal here is weakening. At approximately 6:15 a.m., a team of 4 scientists approached the spherical void with what appeared to be a specialized probe, a metallic sphere suspended within a complex framework of wires and sensors. As they positioned this device near the edge of the emptiness, the void's pulsations accelerated dramatically, the rhythm doubling, then tripling in speed. Dr. Vega shouted something, gesturing frantically for the team to retreat. 3 did. The 4th, a tall man with silver hair, continued adjusting the probe, seemingly oblivious to the void's reaction. Captain Harris ran toward him, but it was too late. The void expanded suddenly, a perfect sphere of nothingness ballooning outward at impossible speed, then contracted just as rapidly. In that split second of expansion, it engulfed the scientist's extended arm to the elbow. When the void retracted, the arm was simply discontinued at the boundary. No blood, no tissue damage. The limb ended in a perfectly smooth plane, as if that portion of reality containing the forearm and hand had been edited from existence. The scientist stared at the impossible wound, his face a mask of fascination rather than pain. No blood flowed. The cross-section of his arm showed bone, muscle, and skin ending in a perfectly flat surface that reflected light like polished obsidian. As medics rushed toward him, something even more impossible happened. The man's truncated arm began to unravel, not physically, but spatially, the smooth boundary sprouting fractal patterns that propagated up his arm across his shoulder. His body maintained physical integrity while simultaneously becoming less substantial, as if dissolving into pure mathematical abstraction. Captain Harris tackled him, trying to drag him toward a containment unit being wheeled forward. Too late. The scientist's form collapsed inward, the space he occupied folding in on itself until nothing remained but a swirl of dust motes in morning light. Harris remained kneeling where the man had been, his posture conveying a soldier who had just witnessed something far beyond combat training. I need to move again. Helicopter searchlights are sweeping more frequently, and I've spotted teams with unusual scanning equipment moving methodically through buildings. Before I go, one final observation. The sky above St. Louis has changed. The dawn revealed clouds forming perfect geometric patterns, concentric circles and spirals centered on each void location. The sun's light passes through these formations in ways that defy normal optics, casting shadows that point in conflicting directions. I'm starting to understand why the military presence is so heavy, why information is being so tightly controlled. This isn't just an anomaly or disaster. The fundamental architecture of reality is being rewritten in the heart of our city. I need to find Corinne. Her warning about the alert suggests she knows more than what's being shared publicly. The emergency management office is 8 blocks from here, and with communications becoming increasingly unreliable, it's my best chance to understand what we're facing. If I don't make it, if you're reading this and the voids continue to spread, don't look directly at them. Don't approach them. The boundaries aren't just physical. Something at the quantum level, at the level of observation itself, is triggering these expansions. Remember the cat. Marcus Webb, Urban Lens STL. Urban Lens STL blog posted by Marcus Webb, May 2nd, 2025, 2:42 p.m. I found Corinne, or maybe she found me. Either way, what she's revealed changes everything I thought I understood about the voids. After witnessing the scientists' dissolution, I moved through the exclusion zone with extreme caution, keeping at least 2 city blocks between myself and any known void location. The emergency management office on Market Street was my destination, but I never made it there. 3 blocks from the building, a hand pulled me into a service doorway, Corinne's hand. She looked different from when I'd last seen her 4 months ago at a mutual friend's wedding. Thinner, with dark circles under her eyes and her normally immaculate business attire replaced by tactical pants and a dark sweatshirt. "You complete idiot," she hissed, pulling me deeper into the building. "What part of evacuation order didn't penetrate that photographer's skull of yours?" Despite everything, I smiled. Same Corinne. She led me through the back corridors of what turned out to be the central library, now repurposed as a secondary command post. Uniformed personnel moved purposefully through the grand reading room, transformed by temporary partitions and hastily installed equipment. Conspicuously, none of the dozens of screens displayed any social media or news feeds, only data readouts, sensor inputs, and topographic overlays of downtown. Corinne brought me to a secluded corner office, once the rare books collection, judging by the empty display cases, and sealed the door. "You shouldn't be here, Marcus. Nobody should. But since you're too stubborn to save yourself." She pulled out a tablet, hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "You need to understand what we're dealing with. What I'm about to show you is classified beyond any security rating you've ever heard of." The video she played was from the Gateway Arch Visitor Center security system, timestamped 3:14 a.m. on April 30th, 2 hours before the arch disappeared. The night vision footage showed the empty museum floor, the familiar exhibits ghostly in grayscale. Nothing unusual for several seconds, then a subtle distortion appeared at the center of the frame, a ripple like heat rising from summer asphalt. The ripple expanded, forming a perfect circle about 3 feet in diameter. Within this distortion, light bent strangely, exhibit cases behind it appeared stretched and warped. For 37 seconds, I counted, nothing else happened. Then, abruptly, an object fell through the distortion, landing heavily on the museum floor. I leaned closer to the screen. The object was a metallic cylinder, approximately 2 feet long, covered in symbols or writing I couldn't identify. As security guards approached in the video, the cylinder began to glow with a light that somehow registered as both blindingly bright and absolute darkness on the security footage. The video ended. "That's 7 minutes before the system went offline," Corinne explained. By dawn, the entire arch was gone. "What was that thing?" I asked. "We don't know. It's not in our possession. When the first response team arrived, they found only a circular impression melted into the floor. The working theory is that it was some kind of probe." "From where?" She met my eyes. "Not from where, Marcus. From when." Corinne explained what the scientific teams led by Dr. Vega have pieced together, a theory so mind-bending that I'm struggling to articulate it coherently. The voids aren't absences of matter. They're intersections between different phases of time-space, windows into what Vega calls shadow dimensions that exist parallel to our own. The antimatter hypothesis was wrong. What appears as nothingness to us is actually space occupied by something our physics can't properly account for, matter operating under fundamentally different quantum rules. Think of reality as a book, Corinne said. Our universe is one page. These voids are places where someone or something has pressed so hard while writing on another page that the pen has torn through to ours. The cylindrical device was likely a dimensional sensor deployed to our reality from elsewhere. Its arrival created a local disruption that has been growing exponentially, weakening the barriers between our dimension and others. The arch wasn't destroyed, she continued. It still exists, just not in our phase of reality anymore. Same with the old courthouse, the fountain, and everything else that's disappeared. I thought about the ghostly outline of the arch I glimpsed at dawn. I saw it, I told her. For just a moment, like an afterimage. She nodded grimly. Phase slippage. The boundaries are becoming increasingly permeable. That's why we're seeing temporal anomalies in communication systems, why the emergency alerts are becoming corrupted. Signals are bleeding through from other iterations. Update. Sham ke 5:17. I'm alone again. Corinne was called away to an emergency briefing after alarms sounded throughout the building. Before leaving, she showed me something else, data from seismic monitoring stations across the Midwest. The patterns were unmistakable. Void events aren't random. They're following the new Madrid seismic zone, the massive fault line system that runs from Illinois to Arkansas. The original arch void appeared directly above a major fault junction. Each subsequent void has emerged at points of significant geological stress. It's like something is using the natural fracture lines in Earth's crust as pathways between dimensions, she explained. The thinner the barrier between realities, the easier the breakthrough. More disturbing was the prediction model on her screen, a simulation showing potential void expansion over the coming days. Under current growth rates, the St. Louis metropolitan area would be entirely subsumed in 72 hours. As Corinne rushed out, she pressed something into my hand, a specialized key card with Umbra clearance and a small device that resembles a pocket compass, except its needle doesn't point north. It points toward the nearest void. Keep this with you, she said. If the needle starts spinning rapidly, you're too close. And Marcus, if you see multiple shadows when there should only be one light source, run. That's phase slippage beginning. I relocated to what seems like a secure location, the basement archives of the Post-Dispatch building. The newspaper staff evacuated days ago, but the generators still provide power, and the older computers aren't affected by whatever signal interference is corrupting newer technology. I was about to continue writing when an emergency alert blared from the building's PA system, not my phone this time. Emergency alert, phase boundary instability detected. All personnel initiate Protocol Echo 9. Calibrate tachyon shielding. Dimensional anchors to maximum power. The voice sounded synthetic, emotionless, yet somehow urgent. I've never heard of tachyon shielding or dimensional anchors outside of science fiction. After the announcement, I checked the compass-like device Corinne gave me. The needle was oscillating wildly, swinging in complete circles before settling into a steady rhythm, pulsing between pointing northeast and straight down, as if unable to decide which direction poses the greater threat. I need to explain something important, something personal I've been avoiding. The reason I was so determined to photograph the arch that fateful morning wasn't just professional dedication. My father helped build the arch in the 1960s. He was a structural welder, one of the men who risked their lives piecing together that impossible curve of stainless steel. He died 3 years ago, but his stories about the arch's construction formed the foundation of my fascination with St. Louis architecture. The morning the arch vanished, I wasn't just losing a landmark or a photography subject, I was losing a connection to him. I mention this because of what I found while searching through old newspaper archives here. A yellowed photograph from October 1965 showing the construction team at the topping out ceremony when the final section of the arch was placed. My father stands in the back row, barely 20 years old. And beside him, a face I recognize from my encounter this morning, Dr. Eleanor Vega. Not as she appears now, not aged a day since 1965. The same woman. The exact same woman who's leading the scientific response to the void phenomena. Who, according to Corinne, specializes in quantum physics and dimensional theory. A woman who should be in her 80s, not the 40-something scientist I photographed earlier today. Something impossible is happening in St. Louis. Something that transcends the boundaries not just of space, but of time itself. And Dr. Vega, whoever or whatever she really is, stands at the center of it all. The lights just flickered again. The compass needle is spinning faster now. I need to move deeper into the building's sublevels. I think the voids are getting closer. Marcus Webb. Urban Lens STL. Urban Lens STL blog, posted by Marcus Webb, May 3rd, 2025, 11:17 a.m. I'm writing this from the back seat of a government SUV, my laptop balanced precariously on my knees as we speed west on Highway 40, away from the city center. The vehicle's emergency lights flash silently, reflecting off the stream of evacuating cars clogging the opposite lanes. Looking back toward downtown, I can see 3 distinct columns of black smoke rising against the morning sky. The official emergency alert insists they're controlled burns to prevent gas line explosions in abandoned areas. I know better. Last night in the Post-Dispatch basement was the longest of my life. The compass Corinne gave me continued its erratic behavior until approximately 3:14 a.m. when it suddenly stopped, needle fixed due east with an unnatural stillness. The silence that followed felt heavier than the alarms that had preceded it. No more emergency broadcasts, no distant sirens, nothing. I ventured upstairs at dawn, expecting to find, I don't know what, more voids perhaps, or military barricades. Instead, I found Corinne waiting in the newspaper's ransacked lobby, flanked by 2 soldiers whose uniforms bore no recognizable insignia. "You need to come with us now," she said. No greeting, no explanation for how she'd found me. Her eyes were bloodshot, her movements jittery with exhaustion or fear. "The situation has evolved." She wouldn't elaborate until we were in the vehicle and moving. Downtown's familiar skyline passed outside the window, now marred by unexplainable absences. The Metropolitan Square building, once the city's tallest, now ended abruptly at the 27th floor. The upper portion vanished as neatly as if sliced by a cosmic blade. 3 more major voids emerged overnight, Corinne finally explained, her voice flat with fatigue. The old cathedral, Union Station, and the entire city garden. But it's not just the voids anymore. It's what's coming through them. She handed me her tablet, cued to security footage from Union Station. The timestamp showed 2:58 a.m. The camera faced the Grand Hall, that magnificent space with its sweeping archways and barrel-vaulted ceiling now empty of tourists. At 3:02 a.m., a void materialized in the center of the hall, a perfect circle of absolute darkness that expanded to roughly 20 feet in diameter. For several minutes, nothing changed. Something emerged from the void. I can't adequately describe what I saw. It wasn't human, wasn't animal, wasn't anything I have reference for. A shifting mass of geometric shapes that seemed to fold into themselves, angles that couldn't exist in three-dimensional space. It moved with deliberate intelligence, examining its surroundings with appendages that appeared and disappeared as needed. The feed abruptly cut to static at 3:14 a.m., the exact moment my compass froze. We've documented 17 distinct entities emerging from various voids, Corinne said. They don't respond to communication attempts. They don't register on thermal imaging, and they can alter physical structures by touch. Alter how? They reshape matter. A concrete wall becomes glass. Steel turns to something resembling tree bark. Dr. Vega calls it cross-dimensional translation. The entities are changing our matter to conform to the physical laws of their reality. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just about things disappearing anymore. It was about our world being actively rewritten. Emergency Alert System, Missouri Primary Entry Point. May 3rd, 2025, 9:03 a.m. This is not a test. The following message is transmitted at the request of the United States Department of Defense and the Federal Emergency Management Agency. A mandatory evacuation order is in effect for all areas within the St. Louis metropolitan region. Residents must proceed immediately to designated evacuation routes. Multiple dimensional anomalies have been detected throughout the region. These phenomena are expanding at an accelerated rate. Remain at least 500 feet from any visible void or structural anomaly. If you observe multiple shadows from a single light source, relocate immediately. If electronic devices malfunction simultaneously, relocate immediately. If you experience temporal disorientation or memory inconsistencies, seek emergency medical attention. Do not approach or attempt to photograph unidentified entities. Report all sightings to military personnel. Evacuation centers have been established at the following locations: Missouri S&T Campus, Rolla; Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville; Southeast Missouri State University, Cape Girardeau; University of Missouri-Columbia. Residents without transportation should proceed to designated collection points for military escort. This concludes this emergency alert. WARNINGREALITY FABRIC degradal RIC degradate RIC DEGRN The emergency broadcast system on the SUV's radio cut out abruptly, replaced by a burst of static followed by what sounded like overlapping voices speaking incomprehensible languages. Corinne switched it off with a quick, nervous movement. This morning's alerts are the last reliable ones we expect to transmit, she said. The broadcast infrastructure is failing faster than predicted. The dimensional interference is affecting all electronic communications. We passed a military checkpoint at the Kings Highway exit, heavily armed soldiers waving us through while holding back civilians trying to move east toward the city center, not away from it. I noticed a small crowd carrying signs, "The truth is in the void," and "Dimensional enlightenment awaits." Void cultists, Corinne explained, following my gaze. They started appearing yesterday. They believe the voids are gateways to transcendence. Some have deliberately entered known void locations. What happened to them? No one knows. There's no evidence they exist anymore. We lapsed into silence. Outside, evacuation traffic crawled westward, cars packed with hastily grabbed possessions, faces pressed to windows looking back at the only home many had ever known. I thought about my apartment, my studio, thousands of photographs and negatives that chronicled my love affair with St. Louis architecture, now abandoned to whatever cosmic fate was befalling the city. "Where are we going?" I finally asked. "Emergency Response Headquarters at Scott Air Force Base. Dr. Vega's team has gathered there. They want to talk to you." "Me?" Corinne didn't answer immediately, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Because of what you saw at the Arch site, your photographs show something no other documentation captured. And because of your connection to Dr. Vega, my mind flashed the 1965 photograph of my father and a woman identical to the modern-day physicist. So you know about that. It was flagged in your background check when you applied for press credentials to cover the initial Arch disappearance." "Who is she, Corinne? How can she be in that photo and still look the same today?" "I don't know. Her credentials check out perfectly. MIT doctorate, research positions at Fermilab and CERN, consultant for the Department of Energy since 2015. But there's no record of her existence before 2010. It's like she simply appeared one day, fully formed, with a brilliant mind uniquely suited to comprehend exactly this type of phenomenon." The SUV suddenly swerved as a massive crack split the highway directly ahead of us. Our driver cursed, wrestling with the wheel as we skidded onto the shoulder. The crack widened before our eyes, pavement curling upward as if pulled by invisible hands. And there, in the sunlight streaming through the windshield, I saw it. My shadow cast against the dashboard, and beside it a second shadow that moved when I did not drive. Our driver reversed sharply, tires spinning on loose gravel, then cut across the median into the eastbound lanes, now empty of evacuation traffic. As we accelerated away, I looked back to see the highway behind us warp and fold, transforming into something that resembled a crystalline structure glittering with impossible colors. "Phase boundary shift," Corinne whispered, her professional demeanor finally cracking. "It's happening faster than the models predicted. Much faster." The compass in my pocket had begun to spin again, no longer indicating any specific direction. I pulled it out, showing it to Corinne. "We're surrounded," she said, her voice barely audible. "The boundaries are collapsing everywhere now?" I reached for my camera instinctively, the photographer in me still desperate to document, to make sense through images. Through the telephoto lens, I could see downtown St. Louis in the distance, half obscured by a strange atmospheric distortion that bent light around the city's remaining buildings. Above it all, faintly visible like a ghost image, was the Gateway Arch, not as it had existed in our reality, but as something else, a twisting, fractal structure that branched and divided against the sky. "I can see it," I said, unable to keep the awe from my voice. "The Arch. It's still there, but changed." Corinne leaned over to look through my viewfinder, her breath catching. "It's not just changed. It's evolved. What we're seeing is the Arch as it exists across multiple dimensions simultaneously." The radio crackled to life suddenly, startling us both. Through bursts of static came a voice that sounded almost like Dr. Vega's, but layered with other voices speaking in unison. "Dimensional collapse accelerating. Containment field integrity at 27%. All personnel initiate Protocol Lazarus. The Arch was always a door." The transmission cut off as abruptly as it had begun. The shadow beside mine on the dashboard had grown darker, more defined. When I moved my hand, it moved a fraction of a second later. "We need to get to the base now," Corinne said to the driver, urgency sharpening her tone. "Take the back roads. Stay away from any structural anomalies." She turned to me, her expression grim. "Whatever's happening, Marcus, you're connected to it somehow. Dr. Vega insisted we find you specifically. Said you were temporally significant? What does that even mean?" "I think it means you're important, not just to understanding what's happening, but maybe to stopping it." The buildings around us were changing as we drove, subtle alterations that would be easy to miss if you weren't looking closely. Brick facades developing crystalline patterns, Windows shifting from rectangular to complex polygonal shapes, street signs displaying characters from no recognizable alphabet. Reality itself was being rewritten around us, and somehow I was supposedly significant to this cosmic event. Me, a local photographer with nothing special about him except a father who helped build an arch that no longer existed, an arch that Dr. Vega claimed was always a door. A door to where? Or more accurately, a door to when? I knew we would find out soon enough. In my viewfinder, the ghostly fractal arch grew more defined with each passing minute. Not gone at all, but transforming into something our three-dimensional eyes were never meant to comprehend. And in my pocket, the compass needle had stopped spinning and now pointed directly at me. Urban Lens STL blog, posted by Marcus Webb, May 4th, 2025, 3:42 a.m. We never made it to Scott Air Force Base. 20 miles from our destination, we encountered what military personnel were calling a dimensional shear zone, a 10-mile stretch where reality had become unstable with patches of roadway spontaneously translating between states of matter. Our driver attempted to navigate through it until the asphalt beneath our tires briefly turned to something resembling mercury, causing us to hydroplane toward the median. Only his quick reflexes prevented a catastrophic crash. With the direct route blocked, we were diverted to a temporary forward operating base established at a rural high school in Clinton County. The school's football field now serves as a helicopter landing zone, its classrooms converted into command centers filled with monitoring equipment and harried personnel. The gymnasium houses hundreds of evacuees on cots, their faces bearing the shell-shocked expression of those who've seen things human minds weren't built to process. It was there, amid the ordered chaos of an impromptu military installation, that I finally came face to face with Dr. Eleanor Vega. She found me in what had once been the school cafeteria, now repurposed as a briefing area. Uniformed analysts clustered around laptops displaying topographic maps overlaid with expanding red circles, void zones growing by the hour. Karen had left me there with instructions to wait while she attended a security briefing. Mr. Webb. I turned to find her standing uncomfortably close, studying me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. In person, the resemblance to the woman in the 1965 photograph was even more striking. Not just similar, identical, down to a small scar above her right eyebrow. "Who are you?" I blurted out, abandoning any pretense of professional courtesy. "How can you be in that photograph with my father?" Her expression didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes, surprised perhaps that I had seen the image. "Walk with me, Mr. Webb," she said, already turning toward a side exit. "What I need to tell you shouldn't be overheard." Against my better judgment, I followed. She led me outside to a concrete stairwell that smelled of old gym shoes and industrial cleaner. A bare bulb cast harsh shadows across her face as she closed the door behind us. "I worked with your father on the arch construction," she said without preamble. "He was a brilliant structural welder, but more importantly, he understood intuitively what we were really building." "We? You make it sound like the arch was your project." "In a manner of speaking, it was." She removed her glasses, polishing them methodically on the hem of her lab coat. "The Gateway Arch was never meant to be merely a monument, Mr. Webb. It was constructed as a dimensional anchor, a fixed point designed to stabilize the intersection of multiple realities." The absurdity of her statement should have made me laugh. Instead, I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach. "That's impossible." "Is it? Consider the arch's unusual shape. A weighted catenary curve mirrored to form a perfect gateway. Consider its precise placement along geological fault lines. Consider the materials used in its construction, not just the stainless steel exterior, but the specialized concrete in its foundation, poured during specific astronomical alignments. She replaced her glasses, her eyes magnified behind the lenses. Your father was one of 7 people who knew the arch's true purpose. He was selected because of certain genetic markers that made him receptive to cross-dimensional awareness. You're saying my father helped build some kind of interdimensional stargate? That's insane. Not a gate we intended to open, Mr. Webb. A stabilizer we designed to keep closed what was already trying to open. The Mississippi Valley sits atop a natural dimensional weak point. The New Madrid fault system isn't just a geological feature, it's a scar where our reality once collided with another. My mind reeled, trying to process her claims. If what you're saying is true, what went wrong? Why is the arch gone and half the city disappearing into voids? Because the anchor failed. For the first time, emotion cracked through her clinical demeanor, frustration, perhaps even fear. After 60 years of perfect functionality, something disabled it. The probe that appeared in the visitor center was designed to target and neutralize the dimensional dampening field generated by the arch. Who sent it? Not who. What? She glanced at her watch, a strange device with multiple dials and no discernible clock face. Time is becoming nonlinear in the affected zones. I'll be direct. We believe the entities emerging from the voids are evolved versions of humanity from an alternate timeline, a humanity that embraced dimensional manipulation technologies we abandoned decades ago. Emergency alert system nationwide transmission. May 4th, 2025, 1:14 a.m. This is not a test. The following message is transmitted at the request of the United States Department of Defense. A national state of emergency has been declared due to expanding dimensional anomalies originating in the St. Louis metropolitan area. Quarantine zones have been established with a 100-mile radius of St. Louis. All civilian travel into these areas is strictly prohibited. Military checkpoints have been established on all major highways. Residents within the quarantine zone who have not yet evacuated must shelter in place. Seal all windows and doors. Do not approach windows if unusual light patterns are observed. Do not attempt to interact with non-human entities. Do not enter areas where physical laws appear altered. Citizens outside the quarantine zone should remain vigilant. Report any of the following to local authorities immediately. Unexplained voids or absences in structures. Multiple shadows from single light sources. Objects changing material properties. Electronic devices displaying impossible time-date readings. Further instructions will be provided as the situation develops. This concludes this emergency alert. The emergency alert blared from every phone and device in the building, simultaneously causing several people to drop what they were holding. Dr. Vega didn't flinch. "Stage 3, she murmured. "It's accelerating faster than even my models predicted." "What's Protocol 0? I asked, a chill running through me. "The contingency plan if containment fails completely." She gestured toward a wall map of the Midwest. "They're preparing to sacrifice the entire region to prevent further spread." "Sacrifice? You mean?" "Yes, Mr. Webb. If the dimensional contamination can't be reversed within the next 48 hours, they intend to employ specialized weapons designed to cauterize reality itself." The cold certainty in her voice made it clear she wasn't speaking metaphorically. Millions of lives, potentially including my own, weighed against the continued stability of the entire planet's dimensional integrity. Before I could process the implications, the building trembled. Not the familiar roll of an earthquake, but something more disturbing, as if the structure itself had briefly forgotten how to be solid. Dust sifted from the ceiling, and through the small window in the stairwell, I saw soldiers outside looking skyward in alarm. I followed their gaze. Above us, the clouds had begun to rotate in a perfect spiral, forming a vortex centered directly over our location. At its center was a darkness deeper than night. "It found us," Dr. Vega whispered, her composure finally cracking. "What found us?" She grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "The entity that sent the probe. It's been tracking us since the arch collapsed. Your photographs from the void site showed its shadow, but I hoped we had time to prepare." Alarms began blaring throughout the building. Through the door to the cafeteria, I could see people rushing to gather equipment, shouting orders I couldn't make out over the din. "You still haven't explained how you were with my father in 1965, I pressed, "even as chaos erupted around us, or why any of this involves me." Dr. Vega fixed me with a penetrating stare. "Because I'm not from this timeline, Mr. Webb. I was sent here in 1964 to ensure the arch was built to specifications that would seal the dimensional weakness. Your father was my contact, my anchor to this reality." She pulled up her sleeve, revealing a device embedded in her forearm, metal and crystal fused with flesh in a way that made my stomach turn. "And you, Marcus Webb, carry his genetic predisposition for dimensional awareness. The compass responds to you because you're attuned to the frequency of the breach. You can see what others can't. The arch as it still exists across dimensions, the entities in their true form." The building shuddered again, more violently. From somewhere nearby came the sound of breaking glass and screams. "We're out of time," Dr. Vega said, pulling a small metallic cube from her pocket. It hummed with energy, symbols similar to those I'd seen on the cylindrical probe scrolling across its surface. "The dimensional anchor was never meant to fail, but now that it has, we need a replacement." Understanding dawned with horrifying clarity. "You want to use me as the anchor." "Not use you." She pressed the cube into my palm where it burned cold against my skin. "Activate what's already within you. Your father wasn't just genetically receptive, Marcus. He volunteered to undergo a procedure to have dimensional stabilizing technology integrated with his DNA to technology that you inherited." The sounds of chaos grew louder. Through the window, I could see soldiers firing upward at shapes descending from the vortex, impossible geometries shifting and folding through space. "If I'm such an important dimensional anchor, why didn't you find me before the arch disappeared?" I demanded. "Because you weren't active yet. The technology is dormant until triggered by proximity to a major breach." Captain Harris burst through the door, assault rifle in hand. "Dr. Vega, we need to move now. They've breached the perimeter." The walls around us began to shimmer, solid matter becoming translucent in patches. Through one such patch, I glimpsed what looked like the interior of a massive organic structure, pulsing tissues and crystalline formations where ordinary drywall should be. Reality was thinning around us. "I don't understand what you want me to do," I said, panic rising in my throat. Dr. Vega's eyes met mine with an intensity that seemed to pierce through to my core. "You need to remember, Marcus. Remember what your father taught you when you were a child. The stories about the arch weren't just bedtime tales, they were instructions, activation protocols disguised as family mythology." The memory surfaced unbidden, my father's voice as he tucked me in at night, telling me about the magic door and the special words that could close it if it ever opened by mistake. A nursery rhyme I'd long forgotten, but now came rushing back with crystal clarity. The cube in my hand grew warmer, responding to my recollection. "There isn't time to explain everything," Dr. Vega said as Captain Harris urgently motioned for us to follow him. "But you need to trust that your father prepared you for this moment. The dimensional collapse can be reversed, but only if you're willing to become what he always knew you might need to be." Outside, the sky had turned the color of a bruise. The vortex was growing, its edges now touching the horizon in all directions. Reality itself seemed to be draining upward into its maw. I had a choice to make, with no time to weigh the consequences and no way to verify anything Dr. Vega had told me. Trust my father's cryptic legacy or watch as the world I knew unraveled around me. The compass in my pocket had gone completely still. Urban Lens STL blog posted by Marcus Webb, May 5, 2025, 11:17 p.m. I've been trying to post updates for nearly 20 hours. The network connectivity inside the quarantine zone fluctuates wildly, sometimes working perfectly, sometimes warping data into unrecognizable patterns. This is my sixth attempt. If you're reading this, I'm still alive. For now. The military convoy never made it out of Clinton County. 3 hours after we evacuated the high school, our caravan encountered what the soldiers called a boundary event, a rippling wall of distortion that appeared without warning across Highway 50, cutting off our escape route. Captain Harris ordered an immediate off-road detour through farmland, but we barely traveled a mile when the ground beneath us shifted. There's no other way to describe it. Solid earth became something else. Not liquid, not gas, but a state of matter I lack the vocabulary to define. 2 transport vehicles were lost before the rest of us could reverse course. I watched in horror as they simply sank, the soldiers inside pounding against windows as reality itself seemed to swallow them whole. Their radio transmissions continued for several minutes afterward, disembodied voices describing conditions that violated every law of physics I've ever known. We're still falling, the vehicle's intact, we can see stars below us. Captain Harris had the radios switched off after that. Emergency Alert System, St. Louis Metropolitan Area. May 5, 2025, 3:46 a.m. This is an emergency directive from the United States Military Special Containment Division. All remaining civilians within the quarantine zone must proceed immediately to designated extraction points. Your final evacuation window closes at 0600 hours. Extraction points. Forest Park Visitor Center. West County Mall Parking Structure. Belleville Public Safety Complex. St. Charles Community College. Do not approach or interact with dimensional anomalies. Do not photograph or record affected areas. Possession of unauthorized documentation of quarantine zone phenomena is now classified as a federal offense. We've taken refuge in what remains of a rural fire station about 15 miles west of St. Louis proper. According to Dr. Vega's instruments, we're currently in a dimensional bubble, a pocket of relatively stable reality surrounded by increasing instability. How long this bubble will last is anyone's guess. Our group has dwindled to 7. Myself, Dr. Vega, Captain Harris, 2 of his soldiers, Corinne, and a local farmer we found wandering along the roadside in shock. The farmer hasn't spoken since we picked him up. He just stares at his hands, turning them over repeatedly as if confirming they still exist. The cube Dr. Vega gave me remains cold in my pocket, occasionally vibrating when we approach the perimeter of our safe zone. She says it's responding to the boundary fluctuations, measuring the integrity of our reality against what lies beyond. I've noticed she watches me constantly, studying my reactions whenever the cube activates. Captain Harris has grown increasingly suspicious of both of us. I overheard him on the satellite phone earlier using phrases like compromise asset and dimensional contamination risk. When he caught me listening, his hand moved instinctively to his sidearm before he thought better of it. Mr. Webb, he said, voice flat, Dr. Vega has explained your unique position in this situation. For now, that makes you valuable. But understand that my orders are explicit regarding anyone exhibiting signs of dimensional corruption. He didn't need to elaborate on what those orders entailed. Corinne has been reviewing emergency management protocols on a hardened military laptop. The battery drains unnaturally fast, losing power completely whenever the screen displays anything related to the voids or the arch. It's as if information itself is being selectively erased. "The evacuation points in that alert don't make sense," she whispered to me when we were momentarily alone. "Forest Park has been completely consumed by a void. West County Mall collapsed into an antimatter pit yesterday. They're sending people to locations that don't exist anymore." I asked her why the military would broadcast false evacuation points. "They're not false," she replied, her voice hollow. "The data in our systems shows those locations as intact. Reality is diverging. What's happening on the ground no longer matches what appears in our databases." She closed the laptop, hands trembling. "It's like the city is existing in multiple states simultaneously, and our systems can only see the version where everything is still normal." At dusk, I stepped outside to clear my head. The sky above our location has taken on a peculiar quality, stars visible despite the fading daylight, but arranged in configurations I don't recognize. The constellations have changed, or perhaps we're seeing the night sky of somewhere else entirely. The horizon to the east, towards St. Louis, is obscured by what looks like a wall of absolute darkness. Not storm clouds, not smoke, but a perfect absence of light or matter. The black radius, the edge of what used to be my home. Dr. Vega joined me, her breath forming unnatural patterns in the cooling air, spirals and geometric shapes that lingered too long before dissipating. "The dimensional contamination is accelerating," she said without preamble. "The antimatter shadows are coalescing into a larger unified void. By tomorrow morning, everything within a 30-mile radius of the arch site will be gone, including us. This location will hold for approximately 10 more hours. After that, the contingency plan you mentioned, to cauterize reality itself." I struggled to process the clinical way she discussed the annihilation of an entire region. What does that even mean? She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Imagine reality as fabric. When it tears, sometimes the only way to prevent the tear from spreading is to burn the edges, sealing them permanently." The implications made me physically ill. "You're talking about some kind of weapon?" "Several, actually. Deployed in sequence to collapse all potential dimensional pathways in the affected region. The resulting excision would remove approximately 9,000 square miles from our reality. 9,000 square miles? Home to millions of people? Everyone and everything I've ever known. There has to be another option," I insisted. Dr. Vega turned to face me directly, her eyes reflecting starlight in ways that seemed wrong, too bright, too fractured. "There is. That's why I've been preserving you, Marcus. Why I've kept Captain Harris from implementing his secondary protocols regarding potential dimensional assets." She placed her hand on my arm, her touch unnaturally cold. "You carry within you the capacity to become what your father helped create, a human dimensional anchor. The technology merged with his genetic code passed down to you. It's been dormant, waiting for the right trigger. The cube. A catalyst, nothing more. The true anchor is you, or rather, what you will become once the process activates fully." A flash of movement caught my eye. Beyond Dr. Vega's shoulder, just at the edge of the darkness on the horizon, something massive shifted. Not visible directly, but perceptible as a disturbance in the perfect blackness, a deeper absence moving within absence. The cube in my pocket began to vibrate violently. "It's searching," Dr. Vega whispered, following my gaze. "The entity that destroyed the arch. It senses the potential for a new anchor forming." What exactly would becoming this anchor mean for me? I asked, already dreading the answer. The arch existed simultaneously across multiple dimensions, maintaining the boundaries between them. To replace it, she faltered for the first time since I'd met her. Your consciousness would need to expand similarly. Your physical form would remain here. Your awareness would extend across dimensional boundaries. You're saying I'd become some kind of human gateway. Not a gateway. A wall. Her voice hardened. What's on the other side has been trying to break through for centuries. The arch was our most successful barrier. Now you're the contingency plan. From inside the fire station, an alarm began to sound. A handheld device Captain Harris carried that detected dimensional fluctuations. I turned to see him emerge, pointing a specialized sensor toward the eastern horizon. "Contact!" he shouted. "Multiple entities approaching from Vector 095. Distance unknown. Readings are off the charts." The darkness on the horizon seemed to pulse, expanding slightly before contracting again. The vibration from the cube had become painful, burning in my pocket like a miniature star. "They found us," Dr. Vega said, her composure cracking. "We need to activate the anchor now, before they breach this bubble." Captain Harris was barking orders into his radio, positioning his remaining soldiers with weapons that looked unlike any conventional firearms I'd ever seen, bulky devices with crystalline components that hummed with energy. "Even if I agreed," I said to Dr. Vega, "how would this work? What do I need to do?" She pulled a second device from her coat pocket, a small silver disc etched with intricate patterns similar to those on the cube. "This will complete the activation sequence, triggering the dormant technology in your genetic code. The process is not without risk." "What kind of risk?" Her expression confirmed my worst fears. "Total consciousness dispersion. If your mind can't adapt to multidimensional awareness, you'll fracture across realities. I'll die." "Death would be simpler," she said softly. "This would be existence without cohesion, fragments of your consciousness scattered across infinite dimensional planes, aware but never whole." A sound like tearing metal echoed across the landscape. In the distance, the wall of darkness bulged inward toward our position, space itself distorting around the intrusion. Captain Harris shouted something I couldn't hear over the sudden roaring in my ears. The soldiers aimed their strange weapons at the distortion energy building in the crystalline components. I felt Karen's hand slip into mine. I hadn't noticed her join us outside. "Whatever you decide," she said, her voice steady despite her fear, "make it your choice. Not hers, not theirs." The cube in my pocket pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat now, its vibration synchronized to my nervous system. I could feel something awakening inside me, dormant patterns in my cells responding to its call, memories I'd never lived rising to the surface of my consciousness. I saw the arch as it truly was, not just the stainless steel monument visible to human eyes, but an immense multidimensional structure extending through layers of reality, anchoring them together like a cosmic staple. I saw my father's hands guiding key components into place during its construction, his awareness already partially extended beyond normal human perception. And I saw what waited on the other side of the dimensional barrier, entities of impossible geometry consuming and converting reality into something alien and incomprehensible. Not malevolent perhaps, but fundamentally incompatible with our existence. Dr. Vega held out the silver disc, her expression grave. "The choice has always been yours, Marcus. But understand, if you refuse, Protocol Zero is the only remaining option." The darkness on the horizon surged forward again, closer this time. Captain Harris raised his hand, giving some prearranged signal to his soldiers. They adjusted settings on their weapons, aiming not at the approaching darkness, but forming a perimeter around our group. "One way or another," the captain said grimly. This breach ends tonight. I looked down at the silver disc in Dr. Vega's palm, then back at the approaching wave of unreality that had once been my home. The memory of my father's voice echoed in my mind, a bedtime story that was never just a story. Remember, Marcus, if the door between worlds ever opens, only someone who exists in both places can close it again. I reached for the disc. Urban Lens STL blog posted by Marcus Webb, May 6, 2025, 8:43 a.m. The silver disc burned cold against my palm when I took it from Dr. Vega. Not the expected metallurgical chill, but something deeper, an absence of thermal energy that seemed to draw heat from my flesh like a miniature void. I almost dropped it, but some deeper instinct made my fingers close around it instead. Time fractured in that moment. I experienced the next 30 seconds both agonizingly slowly and all at once. Captain Harris shouting orders to his remaining soldiers, Corinne's fingers tightening around my free hand, Dr. Vega's expression, not triumph or relief, but a profound sadness that momentarily stripped away her scientific detachment. Hold the disc against the cube, she instructed, her voice strangely distorted as if reaching me through layers of interference. The reaction will be immediate. Before I could respond, our phones emitted a piercing tone, not the standard emergency alert sound, but a dissonant chord that made my teeth vibrate and my vision blur. Emergency Alert System National Security Directive. May 6, 2025, 3:17 a.m. This message is transmitted at the request of the United States Department of Defense. Dimensional Containment Protocol Omega is now in effect. All military personnel are to implement contingency commands immediately. All civilian personnel are hereby subject to Emergency Powers Act Section 9C. There is no evacuation. There is no escape. Only containment remains. Captain Harris's face went rigid as he read the message. His eyes met mine briefly, not with the suspicion I had seen earlier, but with a soldier's grim resignation. He'd just received his final orders. Vega, he barked, 3 minutes to implement your solution, or we move to Protocol Zero. Dr. Vega turned to me, intensity radiating from her entire being. Marcus, you need to decide now. The breach is accelerating. We've lost the eastern perimeter completely. I looked toward St. Louis, or where St. Louis had been. The horizon was no longer visible. The darkness had expanded, seeming to devour light itself, creating a perfect semicircle of nothingness that extended almost to our location. Within that vast emptiness, geometrical shapes pulsed and shifted, patterns that hurt my eyes and brain equally when I tried to focus on them. What exactly will happen if I couldn't finish the sentence. You'll become the dimensional interface, Dr. Vega explained rapidly. Your consciousness will expand to perceive and interact with multiple realities simultaneously. And if Protocol Zero happens instead? Captain Harris answered before Dr. Vega could. Tactical antimatter charges at strategic points around the perimeter. Creates a controlled collapse of local space-time, essentially cutting out this section of reality like removing a cancer. His voice was mechanical, reciting information without emotion. Estimated civilian casualties, 2.7 million. Corinne's grip on my hand tightened. I pulled the cube from my pocket with my free hand. Its vibration had intensified until it felt like holding a miniature jackhammer. The patterns etched into its surface now glowed with an ultraviolet light that shouldn't have been visible to the human eye, yet somehow I could see it clearly, tracing quantum pathways across dimensions I couldn't name. Will I still be me? I asked Dr. Vega. Her hesitation told me everything. Your core consciousness will remain intact, but your perception will be fundamentally altered. You'll experience multiple realities simultaneously. The human mind isn't designed for that kind of awareness, but my father managed it. Partially and only temporarily. The effects ultimately killed him, I finished flatly. That's what really happened, isn't it? Not a stroke. The dimensional awareness drove him insane, then killed him. His neural architecture couldn't sustain the expansion, she admitted. But you're different, Marcus. The research advanced significantly after your father's contribution. The cube has been calibrating to your specific neurological pattern since I gave it to you. Your chances are much better. 2 minutes, Captain Harris warned, checking a specialized device on his wrist that was counting down. Corinne released my hand and moved to stand directly in front of me. Something in her tone made me look at her more closely. There was knowledge in her eyes that hadn't been there before, recognition and understanding beyond what our brief reconnection should have allowed. You knew, I realized suddenly, about my father, about me. This whole time you knew. She nodded, tears forming. I was assigned to monitor you years ago after your father's death. The emergency management position gave me access and proximity. I was supposed to alert Dr. Vega if you ever showed signs of dimensional sensitivity. The betrayal stung, but somewhere beneath the hurt, I understood. This was bigger than personal feelings or relationships. This was about existence itself. 1 minute 45 seconds, Captain Harris announced, his hand now resting on a separate device attached to his tactical vest, presumably the trigger for Protocol 0. I pressed the silver disc against the cube. Nothing happened. It needs direct contact with your skin as well, Dr. Vega instructed, both objects simultaneously. I hesitated for just a second more. Around us, reality itself seemed to be holding its breath. The two soldiers had taken defensive positions, their strange weapons aimed at the approaching wall of darkness. The farmer we'd rescued sat on the ground nearby, still staring at his hands, oblivious to the apocalypse unfolding around him. Drawing a deep breath, I pressed both objects against my bare forearm. The effect was instantaneous and overwhelming. Every nerve in my body fired simultaneously, not with pain, but with information. My consciousness expanded outward like an exploding star, perception fragmenting and multiplying across dimensional planes I had no names for. I saw the gateway arch as it truly existed, not just the stainless steel monument, but a multidimensional anchor point driving deep into the foundation of reality itself. I saw my father's hands helping to place the final segment, his consciousness already partially extended beyond normal human perception. And I saw what waited on the other side of the barrier, vast entities composed of concepts rather than matter, feeding on dimensional energy. Not malevolent, perhaps, but fundamentally incompatible with our existence. It's working, I heard Dr. Vega say, her voice seemingly coming from a great distance. His neural patterns are reconfiguring. I was dimly aware of my physical body collapsing, Corinne catching me before I hit the ground, but most of my awareness had expanded beyond the confines of that limited flesh. I could perceive multiple versions of our reality simultaneously, timelines where the arch never fell, where St. Louis thrived unmolested by dimensional intrusion, where my father lived to old age, and I could see the corruption spreading through our current reality, antimatter shadows eroding the fundamental structure of our dimension, creating pathways for the entities beyond to slip through. Remarkable. Dr. Vega's voice floated through my expanded consciousness. His brain activity should be impossible. He's processing information across multiple quantum states simultaneously. Is he stabilizing the breach? Captain Harris demanded. Not yet. The process is still initializing. His consciousness needs to fully integrate with the dimensional interface. I tried to focus, to pull my fractured awareness back toward a central point. It was like trying to gather fog with my bare hands. Each attempt to consolidate only seemed to spread me thinner across the multiversal landscape. Through the haze of my expanded perception, I became aware of activity around my physical form. Captain Harris was engaged in an intense discussion with someone over his satellite communication device. The two soldiers had taken up defensive positions around our small group, their weapons now aimed not just at the encroaching darkness but in a full perimeter. "Orders are explicit, sir," I heard Harris saying. "If Webb fails to stabilize the breach in the next 60 seconds, I am authorized to implement Protocol Zero." The voice that responded was distorted, filtering through both the communication device and my altered perception. "Negative, Captain. New intelligence suggests Protocol Zero may catastrophically accelerate the breach rather than contain it. The antimatter shadows appear to feed on energy releases of that magnitude." Captain Harris's face hardened. "Then what are my orders, sir?" A pause, heavy with implication. "You are to secure Dr. Vega and evacuate immediately. The Webb subject is to be terminated. His partial transformation may be contributing to dimensional instability." The world seemed to slow around me as I processed this information through my expanded awareness. Terminated. They were going to kill me, cut short this transformation before it could complete, before I could potentially stabilize the breach. From my elevated perspective, I could see the logical reasoning behind the order. I was an unknown variable, a human consciousness stretching across dimensional boundaries in unpredictable ways. From their perspective, removing me from the equation might be the safer option. But I could also perceive possibilities they couldn't, timelines where my transformation completed successfully, where the antimatter shadows receded, where St. Louis and its surrounding areas were gradually restored as the dimensional breach healed. I needed more time. With tremendous effort, I pulled enough of my consciousness back into my physical form to speak. Captain Harris glanced down at me, conflict evident in his expression. "Webb, I have my orders." "Your orders are based on incomplete information," I managed. "I can see all possible outcomes from here. If you terminate this process now, the breach will catastrophically expand. The entities, they're waiting for precisely that disruption." Dr. Vega knelt beside me, her scientific curiosity overriding everything else. "What entities, Marcus? What can you see?" "Negative mass consciousness," I whispered, the words inadequate to describe the vast intelligences I perceived hovering at the edges of our reality. They exist in the spaces between dimensions, feeding on the energy released when barriers collapse. They engineered the Arch's destruction. I could see the skepticism in Captain Harris's eyes, but Karen was nodding slowly. "The patterns in the emergency alerts," she said, "they weren't glitches. They were communications." Captain Harris hesitated, his hand still resting on his sidearm. I could see multiple potential futures branching from this moment, timelines where he followed orders and ended my life, others where he granted me the time I needed. 30 seconds to complete transition, Dr. Vega announced, monitoring something on a specialized tablet. His neural architecture is stabilizing across quantum states. The darkness at the horizon pulsed, expanding several hundred yards closer in an instant. One of the soldiers cried out as the edge of the antimatter shadow passed through his left arm, simply erasing it from existence. There was no blood, no trauma, just a perfect absence where flesh and bone had been. Captain Harris made his decision. "Webb gets 30 more seconds," he announced into his communication device. "After that, we implement the contingency plan." The voice on the other end began to protest, but Harris shut off the device. 25 seconds, Dr. Vega counted down. I reached out with my expanded consciousness, trying to interface with the dimensional tear that had formed when the arch vanished. It was like trying to sew together realities with my bare thoughts, connecting quantum threads that were never meant to interact. 20 seconds. From beyond the barrier, I could sense the negative mass entities becoming aware of my efforts. Their attention turned toward me, vast and alien intelligences perceiving me as a threat to their feeding ground. 15 seconds. Something like tendrils of conceptual force extended toward me across dimensional boundaries, not physical attacks, but attempts to disrupt the patterns of my expanded consciousness. 10 seconds. I felt myself starting to fracture under their assault, my awareness splintering across too many planes of existence simultaneously. The process was breaking down. 5 seconds. In desperation, I reached for the one constant across all the dimensional planes I could perceive, the precise point in space-time where the arch had anchored reality for decades. A ghostly template waiting to be reactivated. "Time's up," Captain Harris declared, drawing his sidearm and aiming it at my head. "Wait!" Dr. Vega shouted, her eyes fixed on her monitoring device. Something's happening. In that moment, I found the connection I needed, the quantum thread that would allow me to recreate the arch's function. Not as a physical structure, but as a pattern within the fabric of reality itself. My physical body arched backward as energy surged through me. My eyes opened wide, but what I saw was not the physical world around me. Instead, I perceived the multidimensional lattice that underpinned our reality and the tiers that had formed when the arch collapsed. With the last of my coherent thought, I forced my consciousness into those tiers, my expanded awareness filling the gaps like sealant in a cracked foundation. The effect rippled outward from my position. The darkness at the horizon shuddered, contracted slightly, then stabilized, no longer advancing. "It's working," Dr. Vega breathed, disbelief and scientific awe mingling in her voice. "He's actually stabilizing the breach." Through increasingly fragmented perception, I heard Captain Harris speaking urgently into his communication device again. "Sir, the web subject appears to be successfully interfacing with the breach. Antimatter shadow expansion has halted. Request new instructions." The response came back clearer this time, a different voice, higher in the chain of command. "Maintain position. Monitor the situation. If Webb successfully reverses the breach, he becomes our highest value asset. Protect at all costs." I felt a grim amusement somewhere in the scattered pieces of my consciousness. From expendable to invaluable in the span of seconds, such was the calculus of crisis management. The farmer, who had been sitting silently throughout this ordeal, suddenly spoke, his voice unnaturally calm. "He won't remain human, you know." "Not really. The interface changes you." All heads turned toward him. The vacant shock was gone from his features, replaced by an unsettling clarity. "How would you know that?" Corinne demanded. The farmer smiled, an expression that didn't quite fit his face. "Because I've seen it happen before, on 17 different worlds across the multiverse. The pattern always repeats. The arch falls, chaos spreads, a human anchor emerges." Dr. Vega stepped toward him cautiously. "Just an observer," he replied. "Someone positioned to document the process for those who study such transitions." Captain Harris aimed his weapon at the farmer. "Identify yourself." The farmer ignored him, his gaze fixed on my convulsing form. "He's reaching the critical threshold now. The moment of choice." And he was right. Through my expanded awareness, I could feel myself approaching a decision point, a quantum fork in my transformation. One path led to complete integration with the dimensional lattice, becoming a permanent anchor, but losing most of what made me human in the process. The other path meant maintaining more of my humanity, but achieving only a temporary stabilization of the breach. The negative mass entities sensed this moment of vulnerability. Their attacks intensified, conceptual tendrils probing the fragile connections I'd established. They were trying to sever my integration with the dimensional lattice before it could fully form. "Something's interfering," Dr. Vega announced, alarm in her voice as she studied her instruments. "His neural patterns are destabilizing." The farmer, or whatever he truly was, nodded knowingly. "They always fight back. They've been feeding on the dimensional energy released by the breach. They won't surrender that resource easily." I tried to communicate what was happening, but my voice no longer functioned normally. What emerged was a series of disjointed phrases in languages that shouldn't have existed in our reality. Negative mass-consuming anchor points, lattice destabilizing, need to... Need to what? Corinne pressed, kneeling beside me. "Marcus, what do you need?" I couldn't answer directly. My consciousness was too dispersed, fighting battles across multiple dimensional planes simultaneously. But a fragment of my awareness registered the cube and disk still pressed against my arm, the physical components that had initiated this transformation. With tremendous effort, I managed to move my free hand toward them, tapping them weakly. Dr. Vega caught the gesture immediately. The quantum resonance needs amplification, she realized. The initial catalyst isn't strong enough to sustain the full transformation. She reached into her bag and withdrew a third device, a small cylindrical object covered in the same intricate patterns as the cube and disk. "This was meant to be used only under controlled laboratory conditions," she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. "The power requirements are enormous." Captain Harris understood immediately. "What do you need?" "Everything you've got," she replied. "Vehicle batteries, generators, weapons power cells, anything that can provide a significant energy surge." The next few minutes passed in a blur of activity that I perceived only dimly through my fractured consciousness. The soldiers dismantled equipment, creating a makeshift power array connected to Dr. Vega's cylindrical device. Captain Harris added the power cells from their specialized weapons, crystalline objects that pulsed with energy that wasn't entirely of our dimension. Throughout this process, the farmer watched with detached interest, occasionally offering suggestions that revealed knowledge no ordinary person should possess. "The dimensional harmonics require precise calibration," he commented at one point as Dr. Vega struggled to align the cylindrical device with the cube and disk. 17.3 degrees offset, not 15. Dr. Vega glanced at him suspiciously, but adjusted the angle as suggested. The patterns on all three objects immediately aligned, glowing with increased intensity. "Who are you really?" she demanded. The farmer's smile returned, enigmatic and unsettling. "Let's just say I represent interested observers. Entities who prefer balance between dimensions rather than conquest." "You're not human," Corinne stated flatly. "This form is borrowed," he admitted. "Temporarily. A convenient vantage point to observe this particular dimensional node. We've been monitoring the arch since its construction, knowing its eventual failure was statistically inevitable." Captain Harris kept his weapon trained on the farmer entity. "Are you responsible for this catastrophe?" "No. We merely observe and occasionally nudge events toward preferable outcomes." His gaze returned to my convulsing form. "The negative mass entities are your true adversaries. They've been trying to breach your reality for centuries. The arch was specifically designed to prevent that, a fact its human architects never fully comprehended." My fragmented consciousness caught glimpses of truth in his words, seeing across time to the arch's construction, recognizing subtle modifications in its design that served no architectural purpose but created a perfect dimensional resonance pattern. Dr. Vega completed the power connections to her cylindrical device. "Ready on your mark, Captain." Captain Harris nodded grimly. "Do it." She pressed a sequence of patterns on all three objects simultaneously. Energy surged through the makeshift array, electrical systems overloading in cascading failures as power flowed into the devices. The effect hit me like a dimensional thunderbolt. My consciousness, which had been fragmenting across multiple realities, suddenly snapped into a new configuration, still expanded beyond normal human perception, but now structured around a central lattice pattern that mirrored the quantum signature of the arch. I could feel the negative mass entities recoiling as my awareness solidified into something they couldn't easily disrupt. The tendrils of conceptual force they had extended toward me withered against the structured energy now flowing through my expanded consciousness. Through my physical eyes, which now perceived layers of reality simultaneously, I saw the wall of darkness at the horizon pulse once, twice, and then begin to recede. Slowly at first, then with increasing speed, the antimatter shadows contracted toward their origin point at the former site of the gateway arch. "It's working," Corinne whispered, hope creeping into her voice for the first time in days. Dr. Vega was monitoring her instruments with scientific intensity. The dimensional breach is stabilizing. The negative mass signatures are being forced back across the barrier. The farmer entity nodded with satisfaction. The anchor is forming correctly. He's becoming the new interface. Captain Harris lowered his weapon slightly, watching the retreating darkness with cautious optimism. "Webb, can you hear us? Are you still you?" I tried to respond, but conventional language seemed hopelessly inadequate for what I was experiencing. I was Marcus Webb, yes, but I was also something more, my consciousness expanding across dimensional boundaries in ways I couldn't have comprehended before. What emerged from my mouth was a strange hybrid of English and something else, concepts that human vocal cords were never designed to express. I am functioning as the anchor. The breach is contained, but the entities, they're still pressing against the barrier, searching for weaknesses. "Can you hold them back?" Dr. Vega asked urgently. "For now," I managed. "But I'm not complete yet. The transformation isn't finished." The farmer entity stepped forward, ignoring Captain Harris's warning to stay back. He needs to make the final choice now, to fully integrate with the dimensional lattice or remain partially human. Each has consequences. "What happens if he fully integrates?" Corinne demanded. "He becomes a permanent anchor, like the arch, but more adaptive, more responsive to dimensional threats. St. Louis will be protected indefinitely." "And if he doesn't?" The farmer entity's expression turned grave. "The containment will be temporary. Days, perhaps weeks. Then the negative mass entities will find another way through, and everything starts again, but worse." "What happens to Marcus if he fully integrates?" Corinne pressed, asking the question I couldn't articulate. The farmer entity hesitated. "He will exist across multiple dimensions simultaneously. His human consciousness will expand beyond recognition. What makes him Marcus Webb will become just one small component of a much larger awareness. He'll lose himself," Corinne translated flatly. "He'll become more than himself," the entity corrected. "But yes, his human identity, as you understand it, would be fundamentally altered." Through the kaleidoscope of my fragmented perception, I tried to assess my options. I could feel the negative mass entities regrouping on the other side of the dimensional barrier, not retreating, merely reconsidering their approach. Their hunger for our reality remained undiminished. I could also perceive the structure of the choice before me, the quantum pathways leading to either outcome. Full integration would indeed make me a permanent anchor, but at the cost of my humanity. The alternative would preserve more of my human consciousness, but provide only temporary protection. Dr. Vega was watching me intently, her scientific curiosity warring with unexpected compassion. "The choice has to be his," she said finally. Captain Harris frowned. "With all due respect, Doctor, the stakes are too high for sentimentality. Webb needs to complete the integration. Millions of lives depend on it. And what about his life? Compared to 2.7 million civilians? No, it doesn't," Harris replied bluntly. As they argued, I expanded my awareness further, searching for alternatives they couldn't perceive. And there, at the quantum edge of possibility, I found something unexpected. A third option, a narrow pathway between outcomes that might allow me to maintain the core of my human identity while still providing the dimensional stability needed. It would require precise manipulation of the quantum lattice, restructuring the anchor point to function differently than the original arch. Instead of a fixed barrier between dimensions, it would become a managed interface, allowing me to shift between full integration and limited human consciousness as needed. With tremendous effort, I pulled my scattered awareness together enough to speak coherently. There's another way. Not permanent, not temporary, cyclical. Dr. Vega leaned closer. I can establish a rhythm. Full integration during critical periods, return to limited human consciousness between crises. The farmer entity's eyebrows rose in apparent surprise. Fascinating. I hadn't considered that configuration. Is it viable? Dr. Vega demanded. Theoretically, the entity conceded, though I've never observed it successfully implemented across the multiverse scenarios I've monitored. Will it protect St. Louis? Captain Harris asked, cutting to his primary concern. I nodded weakly. The negative mass entities, they surge in cycles. I can match their patterns. Be fully present as the anchor when needed, return to myself between surges. A part-time dimensional anchor, Dr. Vega murmured. Unprecedented, but possibly sustainable. I could feel the structure of reality shifting around me as I began implementing this alternative approach, reformatting the quantum lattice into a dynamic pattern rather than a static barrier. The negative mass entities reacted immediately, sensing the change and probing for weaknesses. But there was something they hadn't anticipated, something I hadn't fully understood until this moment of transformation. My connection to St. Louis went beyond physical presence. Every photograph I'd taken, every street I'd documented, every aspect of the city I'd observed and captured, they formed a web of awareness that strengthened my ability to recreate what had been lost. The city, I gasped. I can see it all. Every building, every street, the pattern of its existence is still accessible. The farmer entity stepped closer, genuine interest in his borrowed features. He's accessing temporal echo patterns. Remarkable. Explain, Dr. Vega demanded. He's using his memories and knowledge of the city as a template to restore what was erased. The antimatter shadows didn't truly destroy matter, they displaced it across dimensional boundaries. With the right interface, that displacement can be reversed. Beyond the perimeter of our small sanctuary, something impossible was happening. Where there had been perfect darkness, the absence of reality itself, pinpoints of light began to appear. Tiny fragments of St. Louis returning from dimensional exile. My God, Corinne whispered. He's bringing it back. The process was agonizingly slow and incomplete. Buildings partially reforming, streets returning in fragmented sections, the fabric of the city reconstructing itself in patchwork fashion. But it was undeniably happening. Captain Harris stared in disbelief at the miracle unfolding before him. Webb, you're exceeding all projected capabilities. Can you maintain this? I didn't have the strength to respond verbally anymore. My consciousness was spread too thin across too many tasks. holding back the negative mass entities, reformatting the dimensional anchor point, retrieving fragments of St. Louis from across dimensional boundaries. The farmer entity answered for me. He's approaching a critical threshold. The next few minutes will determine whether his approach succeeds or catastrophically fails. Dr. Vega's instruments began emitting urgent alerts. His neural patterns are destabilizing again. Too much information flow for his brain to process. He needs to complete the anchor configuration before attempting restoration, the entity observed calmly. He's dividing his focus too broadly. Corinne took my hand, squeezing it tightly. Marcus, focus on becoming the anchor first. The city can wait. Through our physical connection, I felt a strange resonance, as if Corinne herself was somehow reinforcing my fragmented consciousness, providing a focal point among the chaos of expanded awareness. With tremendous effort, I pulled back from the restoration process, concentrating instead on finalizing the cyclical anchor configuration. The partially reformed fragments of St. Louis flickered uncertainly in the distance, some fading back into dimensional exile without my active intervention to sustain them. The anchor pattern is stabilizing, Dr. Vega reported, watching her instruments. Neural integration approaching sustainable levels. Captain Harris's communication device activated unexpectedly, the voice on the other end sounding both urgent and confused. Harris, we're getting impossible readings from your position. Satellite imagery shows partial restoration of erased sectors. Confirm status immediately. Confirmed, Harris replied, eyes fixed on distant fragments of returning cityscape. Webb has established himself as a functional dimensional anchor and is demonstrating limited ability to reverse antimatter effects. There was a long pause before the response came. All prior orders regarding the Webb subject are rescinded. You are to secure him and prepare for immediate extraction once a safe corridor can be established. He is now classified Omega-level strategic asset. I barely registered this exchange. My consciousness was locked in the final, crucial phase of establishing the cyclical anchor pattern, creating quantum pathways that would allow me to shift between full-dimensional integration and limited human awareness. The negative mass entities sensed what I was attempting. Their attacks intensified, conceptual tendrils probing for any weakness in the forming pattern. But with each passing second, the anchor grew more stable, more resilient to their assault. Almost there, the farmer entity observed. The pattern is nearly complete. Dr. Vega's instruments confirmed his assessment. Dimensional stability increasing exponentially. The breach is sealing itself. With one final surge of effort, I completed the transformation, locking the cyclical pattern into the quantum lattice of reality itself. The effect was immediate and profound. The negative mass entities recoiled as the dimensional barrier solidified, forcing them back into their native realm. The darkness at the horizon contracted rapidly, collapsing inward toward its origin point like water down a drain. In its wake, fragments of St. Louis remained, incomplete but undeniably real, gradually stabilizing as normal physics reasserted itself over. Urban Lens STL blog, posted by Marcus Webb, May 8, 2025, 2:17 a.m. The world beyond the perimeter has become something I cannot adequately describe with language meant for three-dimensional beings. Trying to communicate what I see is like trying to explain color to someone born blind. The conceptual framework simply doesn't exist. But I must try. After Dr. Vega's revelation and Captain Harris's reluctant confession about Protocol Zero, I've been experiencing what can only be described as dimensional slippage. My consciousness no longer fits neatly within the confines of my skull. I perceive layers of reality simultaneously, ghostly after images of what St. Louis was, is, and could have been, all overlapping like multiple exposures in a single photograph. The emergency alerts have stopped. At least, the official ones have. My phone hasn't received a coherent broadcast in over 6 hours. Instead, it emits occasional bursts of sound that don't register as language but somehow impart meaning directly into my mind. Corinne says my phone remains silent when she checks it. Only I can hear them. Emergency alert system metadimensional broadcast. May 8th, 2025, 1:04 a.m. Dr. Vega believes we must return to the exact spot where the arch once stood. According to her calculations, that point remains the weakest in the dimensional fabric, the center of the antimatter shadow that started this nightmare. She's convinced it's our only chance to reverse what's happening. Captain Harris disagrees. His military assessment suggests that approaching the epicenter would be suicide. The few reconnaissance drones they've sent toward downtown have all disappeared the moment they crossed what he calls the event horizon, the boundary where normal physics simply ceases to function. I say we go. Not because of Dr. Vega's theories or despite Captain Harris's warnings, but because something is pulling me there. A gravitational force that tugs not at my body, but at my consciousness. Whatever I'm becoming knows that the answer lies at the origin point. We've been traveling for 6 hours through what remains of St. Louis County. The landscape is a fragmented nightmare, patches of normal reality interrupted by perfect voids where matter has been completely erased. Other areas exist in states that defy description where physical laws operate differently or not at all. In one neighborhood, we watched as rain fell upward from the ground into a cloudless sky. Our small group has dwindled. The 2 soldiers who accompanied Captain Harris were lost 3 hours ago when a sudden expansion of antimatter shadow engulfed them mid-stride. One moment they were there, the next, only empty air remained. No sound, no disintegration, no dramatic farewell, just absence where presence had been. Now it's just the 4 of us. Myself, Corinne, Dr. Vega, and Captain Harris. We move slowly through this broken reality, navigating between stable zones using the strange perceptual abilities I've developed. I can somehow sense where the fabric of reality remains intact enough for safe passage. Your transformation is accelerating. Dr. Vega observed an hour ago, studying me with both scientific fascination and growing concern. Your brainwave patterns are oscillating between normal human frequencies and something else entirely, wave functions that shouldn't be possible in organic matter. I didn't need her instruments to tell me what I already knew. I'm becoming something other than human, a hybrid consciousness existing partly in our dimension and partly beyond it. The process is both exhilarating and terrifying. Moments of cosmic clarity interspersed with periods of overwhelming sensory input that threatens to shatter my mind. Corinne stays close, her hand often finding mine when my perception starts to drift too far from baseline human experience. Her touch anchors me, providing a focal point that helps me remember who Marcus Webb is before all this began. Stay with us, she whispers whenever my gaze drifts toward vistas visible only to my altered perception. Just a little longer. Captain Harris maintains his military bearing, but I can see the strain in his eyes. His training never prepared him for reality itself becoming the enemy. Still, he guards our small group vigilantly, his weapon ready, though against what, none of us can say. What defense can conventional weapons offer against the unraveling of dimensional boundaries? We've reached what was once the Mississippi riverfront. The river itself is gone, not dried up or diverted, but simply absent. In its place is a perfect geometric channel carved through reality, its surface a mirror-like blackness that reflects nothing. Beyond this void lies downtown St. Louis, or what remains of it. The urban landscape has been transformed into something that resembles an M.C. Escher drawing rendered in 3 dimensions. Buildings stand at impossible angles, streets fold back upon themselves in non-Euclidean geometries, and gravity seems to operate differently from one block to the next. And at the center of it all, where the gateway arch once stood, is a perfect hemisphere of absolute darkness, a dome of nothingness that seems to both absorb and emit a strange anti-light that hurts my eyes to look at directly. That's our destination, I tell the others, pointing toward the impossible structure. Dr. Vega studies it through specialized goggles, her expression grim. The readings are off the scale. That's not just an absence of matter, it's an absence of dimensional structure itself, a true void between realities. How do we even approach that? Corinne asks, her voice steady despite the fear I know she must feel. We don't, Captain Harris states flatly. No one could survive crossing that perimeter. I can, I say with a certainty that comes not from confidence but from the expanded awareness that now shares space with my human consciousness, and I need to go alone. This statement triggers immediate protest from all 3 of my companions. Karen's is the most vehement, a flat refusal that surprises me with its intensity. We started this together, she insists. We finish it together. Your physical forms won't survive the transition, I explain, struggling to translate concepts my altered perception understands into language they can comprehend. The boundary between dimensions there is porous. Matter behaves differently. What I'm becoming might pass through, what you are cannot. And what exactly are you becoming, Marcus? Dr. Vega asks, scientific curiosity momentarily overriding her concern. I consider the question, searching for words to describe the transformation occurring within me. I'm becoming a junction point between dimensions, a human consciousness expanded to perceive and interact with multiple planes of existence simultaneously. Like the arch was, she concludes, understanding dawning in her eyes. It wasn't just a monument, it was a dimensional anchor, disguised as architecture. Yes, I confirm, relieved she understands. My father knew, I think. Not consciously, perhaps, but on some level. That's why he photographed it so obsessively, documenting it from every angle in every condition. He was recording a multidimensional structure that existed beyond what most people could perceive. And now you're becoming its replacement, Corinne says quietly. I nod. The antimatter shadows are symptoms, not the cause. When the arch vanished, it created a gap in the dimensional barrier, a door left open. Something is trying to come through that door, something that doesn't belong in our reality. Captain Harris, ever practical, cuts to the heart of the matter. Can you close this door? I believe so, I reply. But I need to reach the epicenter, the point where the arch once stood. There must be another way, Corinne insists. One that doesn't require you to sacrifice yourself. Your concern touches me deeply, but I can see possibilities she cannot. It's not necessarily a sacrifice, I tell her. It's a transformation. What I'm becoming won't cease to exist. It just might exist differently than you can comprehend. Dr. Vega interrupts our exchange, her attention caught by something on her instruments. We have company, she warns, pointing toward the fractured cityscape to our west. Moving through the broken geometry of downtown St. Louis is a group of figures, human in basic shape but wrong in ways that send shivers through my expanded perception. They walk with jerky, asymmetrical movements as if their bodies aren't fully subject to the physics of our dimension. What are they? Captain Harris asks, raising his weapon. Through my altered vision, I can see the truth. They're people, St. Louis residents, who were caught in the dimensional fracture when the arch collapsed. They've been partially translated into another state of being, not fully in our reality anymore. As they draw closer, I can make out more details and wish I couldn't. Their physical forms flicker between normal human appearance and something else, geometries that shouldn't be possible in three-dimensional space, limbs that bend at impossible angles, faces that occasionally reveal glimpses of cosmic horror before snapping back to human features. They're drawn to the dimensional energy, I explain, like moths to flame. They don't understand what's happening to them. Are they dangerous? Harris demands, finger tightening on his trigger. Not intentionally, I reply, but they're unstable. Their very presence distorts local reality. As if to confirm my assessment, the area around the approaching figures warps visibly, matter bending and stretching in ways that defy physical laws. A nearby lamppost twists into a Mobius strip of metal without breaking. The pavement beneath their feet ripples like liquid despite remaining solid. We need to move, I urge. Now, before they draw more attention to us. More attention from what? Corinne asks. Before I can answer, a sound cuts through the unnatural silence, a deep, resonant tone that seems to vibrate not just through the air, but through reality itself. It's coming from the dark hemisphere where the arch once stood. The sound triggers another pulse from my phone. Emergency Alert System Metadimensional Broadcast. May 8, 2025, 1:47 a.m. The transformed citizens stop their advance, heads tilting in perfect unison toward the dark hemisphere. As one, they open their mouths, but what emerges isn't a human scream. It's that same resonant tone, perfectly replicated, amplified by their distorted vocal cords. They're responding to it, Dr. Vega whispers, like a call and response. More like a radar ping and return signal, I correct her. Whatever is on the other side of that dimensional barrier is using them to locate us. Captain Harris makes an immediate tactical decision. New plan. We cross the riverbed now, approach the target from the east side, use the distortion from these individuals as cover. It's a good plan, given our limited options. We descend carefully into the geometric channel where the Mississippi once flowed, using debris and fractured reality as handholds. The surface isn't water or even solid ground. It's something between states, a quantum uncertainty made manifest. Our feet sink slightly into it before finding resistance. We're halfway across when reality shifts again. The dark hemisphere at the arch site pulses, expanding slightly before contracting back to its original size. The pulse sends a wave of distortion rippling outward in all directions. When the wave hits us, my perception fractures completely. For several seconds, I experience multiple versions of reality simultaneously. In one, we continue crossing the riverbed unharmed. In another, Captain Harris disappears entirely, erased from existence. In a third, Corinne's form distorts horrifically, her body twisting into impossible geometries as she screams. In yet another, Dr. Vega transforms into something not human, her features rearranging into patterns that belong to another dimensional plane entirely. When my perception resolves, I discover the first version was our fate. We all remain intact, continuing our crossing. But something has changed. The others don't notice it yet, but I can see thin filaments of energy now connecting each of us to the dark hemisphere, quantum entanglement made visible to my altered senses. We're being tagged, tracked, marked for observation, or worse. We reach the eastern bank and take cover behind the ruins of a building that now exists in several states simultaneously, partly solid architecture, partly geometrical abstraction, partly void. From this vantage point, we have a clear line of sight to the dark hemisphere approximately half a mile ahead. I need to go the rest of the way alone, I insist again. The closer we get to the epicenter, the more dangerous it becomes for conventional matter. Conventional matter, Corinne repeats, catching the implication, which you no longer consist of entirely. My physical form is still primarily matter as you understand it, I explain. But my consciousness has expanded beyond those limitations. I can perceive and potentially interact with whatever exists on the other side of that barrier. Captain Harris studies me with military assessment. What exactly do you plan to do when you reach that thing? It's a fair question, one I'm not sure I can answer in terms they'll understand. I need to reestablish the anchor point, create a new barrier where the arch once stood, seal the breach between dimensions. And how exactly will you accomplish that? Dr. Vega asks. I'll know when I get there, I admit. This transformation I'm undergoing, it includes knowledge I can't access all at once. It's revealing itself gradually as I approach the epicenter. This answer satisfies no one, but we've run out of alternatives. Even Captain Harris seems to recognize the futility of conventional approaches in this situation. We'll give you cover for as long as we can, he says finally. But if that thing starts expanding again, we're pulling back to minimum safe distance. I nod, grateful for his pragmatism. If I fail, distance won't matter. The dimensional breach will continue expanding exponentially until it consumes everything. Corinne steps forward, her face set with determination. Then don't fail. She reaches into her pocket and withdraws something unexpected, a small, worn photograph. Take this with you. It's an old Polaroid of the Gateway Arch taken decades ago when it was newly constructed. The edges are yellowed with age, but the image remains clear, the gleaming stainless steel curve captured at sunrise, perfect and unblemished. Where did you get this? I ask, surprised. Your father gave it to me, she admits, years ago when I was first assigned to monitor you. He said if things ever went wrong, really wrong, I should make sure you had it. Said it would help you remember what matters. I take the photograph, and the moment my fingers touch its surface, another dimensional shift occurs, but this one is controlled, focused. The image on the Polaroid seems to shimmer and deepen, revealing layers of information beyond what the camera captured. I can see the quantum structure of the arch, the precise mathematical relationships that allowed it to function as a dimensional anchor point. He knew, I whisper. All this time, he knew what the arch really was. Not consciously, Corinne says. Dr. Vega explained it to me. Your father had a partial sensitivity to dimensional anomalies, enough to be drawn to the arch repeatedly, to document it obsessively, but not enough to fully perceive its true nature. That sensitivity is what he passed to you, but in your case, it's much stronger. The pieces fall into place. My father's obsession with the arch, his countless photographs from every angle, his insistence that I learn to see beyond the obvious when composing my own shots. He was teaching me to perceive what he could only sense intuitively. I need to go now, I say, tucking the Polaroid into my shirt pocket directly over my heart. Whatever is coming through that breach isn't waiting any longer. As if in confirmation, another resonant tone emanates from the dark hemisphere, louder this time, complex harmonics rippling through multiple dimensional planes simultaneously. The transformed citizens respond in kind, their distorted voices creating a discordant chorus that makes reality itself shudder around us. Dr. Vega's instruments begin emitting urgent alerts. Energy readings are spiking exponentially. Whatever's happening is accelerating. I step out from our cover, moving toward the dark hemisphere with purpose. Behind me, I hear Captain Harris positioning himself and the others to observe and potentially provide assistance. though what form that assistance might take remains unclear. As I walk, the city around me becomes increasingly abstract, buildings and streets losing their definite forms, dissolving into patterns of probability rather than solid matter. Gravity becomes inconsistent, sometimes strengthening to pull me to my knees, other times weakening until I must concentrate to keep my feet on the ground. My perception continues to expand. I see St. Louis not just as it is now, but as it has been throughout its history, layers of time visible simultaneously. The original French settlement, the bustling riverfront of the steamboat era, the industrial growth of the early 20th century, the construction of the arch itself, all existing as quantum echoes overlapping the fractured present. And beyond that, I perceive versions of St. Louis that never were possible, timelines branching infinitely. Cities where the arch was never built, where different architectural choices created entirely different urban landscapes, where historical events took alternate paths. The dark hemisphere grows larger as I approach, though I now understand it's not actually expanding. My perception of it is simply becoming more complete as I draw nearer. What appeared as a perfect geometric shape from a distance reveals itself as something far more complex up close, a multidimensional construct that extends beyond the limits of three-dimensional space. When I'm approximately 100 yards away, the first direct attack comes. Not a physical assault, but something far more insidious, a conceptual intrusion that targets my consciousness directly. Alien thoughts begin infiltrating my mind, attempting to override my identity with something wholly other. I stagger under the assault, falling to one knee as I struggle to maintain the core of who I am. The alien consciousness is vast and utterly inhuman intelligence that perceives our reality as nothing more than a resource to be consumed, our existence as meaningless as we might consider bacteria. Through the fragmenting kaleidoscope of my perception, I see Corinne break cover and start running toward me, ignoring Captain Harris's shout of warning. The sight of her anchors me, provides a focal point for my scattered awareness. I am Marcus Webb. I am a photographer who documents St. Louis. I am becoming something more, but I will not be erased. The alien presence recoils slightly at this resistance, shifting tactics. Instead of trying to override my identity, it now offers knowledge, vast cosmic secrets, understanding beyond human comprehension, power that could reshape reality itself. All I need to do is allow it passage, become its vessel rather than its opponent. The temptation is nearly overwhelming. Part of my expanded consciousness can grasp the magnitude of what's being offered, knowledge that would transform humanity's understanding of existence itself. But I also perceive the price, the gradual consumption of our dimension, beginning with St. Louis, but eventually encompassing everything. Marcus! Before our fingers can touch, reality between us tears open, a localized, dimensional breach materializing from nowhere. Through this smaller version of the dark hemisphere, something begins to emerge, a physical manifestation of the entity attempting to enter our world.
It defies description in conventional terms. The closest approximation would be a constantly shifting geometric pattern composed of angles that shouldn't be possible in three-dimensional space, pulsing with colors that exist beyond the visible spectrum.
But this fails to capture its fundamental wrongness, the sense that its very existence violates the basic rules of our reality. Captain Harris opens fire immediately, the hypersonic rounds passing through the entity without effect. Dr. Vega frantically adjusts settings on a device she's assembled from components in her bag, eventually producing a focused beam of energy that strikes the emerging entity. This has a more noticeable effect. The shifting patterns destabilize momentarily, parts of the manifestation seeming to phase in and out of our dimension, but the entity quickly adapts, adjusting its dimensional frequency to compensate. I struggled back to my feet, drawing on reserves of strength I didn't know I possessed. The photograph in my pocket pulses with energy I can perceive but not explain, some quality captured in that image of the arch resonating with my transformed consciousness. "Corinne, get back!" I shout, though my voice emerges distorted, overlapping with harmonics from other dimensions. The entity between us turns its attention fully on me now, recognizing the true threat. Tendrils of conceptual force lash out, attempting to disrupt the transformation I'm undergoing. I feel my consciousness fragmenting under the assault, pieces of my awareness scattered across multiple planes of existence simultaneously. In this moment of crisis, I remember the photograph. With tremendous effort, I pull it from my pocket and focus my fractured perception on the image of the arch, not just the physical structure captured on film, but the dimensional anchor point it represented. Understanding floods through me, not as abstract concepts, but as direct experiential knowledge. I see how the arch functioned, the precise mathematical relationships that allowed it to maintain separation between dimensional planes, and more importantly, I see how I can recreate that function, not as an external structure, but as a pattern within my own expanded consciousness. The entity senses my intention and redoubles its assault. Reality around us becomes increasingly unstable as our conflict escalates beyond the physical into a multi-dimensional struggle of opposing patterns and information structures. I'm dimly aware of what's happening in the physical world, Corinne being pulled back by Captain Harris, Dr. Vega's instruments overloading from the energy being released, the dark hemisphere at the arch site pulsing in synchronization with the entity's attacks. But most of my awareness is focused on the pattern I'm attempting to establish within my transformed consciousness. I reach the mathematical center of where the arch once stood. The dark hemisphere envelops me completely, and for a moment I cease to exist as a physical entity in conventional space-time. My consciousness expands beyond all previous limitations, perceiving the full extent of the dimensional breach and the vast alien intelligence attempting to pour through it. It's not a single entity, I realize, but a collective consciousness, a civilization from another dimensional plane that perceives our reality as territory to be colonized. The antimatter shadows weren't weapons but tools, dimensional scalpels cutting away pieces of our reality to make room for theirs. In this moment of perfect clarity, I understand what I must do. Not just seal the breach, but transform it, convert this weakened point between dimensions from a doorway into a filter, allowing communication without contamination, perception without invasion. I begin restructuring my expanded consciousness into the precise mathematical pattern the arch once embodied, but with a crucial difference. Where the arch was static, a rigid barrier between dimensions, I will become dynamic, an adaptive interface capable of responding to threats as they emerge. The alien collective recognizes my intention and mounts a final, desperate assault. Conceptual weapons beyond human understanding tear at the fabric of my consciousness, attempting to disrupt the pattern before it can stabilize. The pain transcends physical sensation, existing as pure information trauma, error messages cascading through the deepest levels of my being. In this moment of near defeat, the photograph against my heart pulses once more, and with it comes an unexpected presence. Not physical, not even fully conscious, but a pattern of information preserved somehow in that captured image of the arch. My father's perception, his intuitive understanding of what the structure truly was, encoded in the precise way he composed and captured that photograph decades ago. This echo of my father's consciousness merges with mine, adding its strength to my own. The pattern stabilizes, expands, locks into place across dimensional boundaries. I feel the alien collective recoil as the breach begins to seal, their access to our reality narrowing. With the last of my coherent thought, I push my awareness fully into the mathematical center of where the arch once stood, the precise focal point of the dimensional anchor. There, I expand the pattern outward in all directions, recreating the barrier between realities not as a physical structure, but as a persistent quantum state maintained by my transformed consciousness. The effect is immediate and profound. The dark hemisphere contracts rapidly, collapsing inward until it's contained entirely within the pattern I've established. The alien collective's presence in our dimension is forced back, compressed into the infinitesimal space between realities where it can observe but no longer directly interact. In the physical world, a shockwave of dimensional energy radiates outward from my position. The antimatter shadows throughout St. Louis begin to recede, contracting back toward their point of origin. Matter that had been displaced across dimensional boundaries starts to return, buildings, streets, and structures reappearing in ghostly, partial forms. My expanded perception registers Dr. Vega's scientific amazement, Captain Harris's strategic relief, and Corinne's personal anguish, all simultaneously, all understood with perfect clarity. They see my physical body still standing at the epicenter, but surrounded by a field of energy that ripples with patterns no human eye was designed to perceive. I try to speak, to reassure them that I still exist, that I haven't been erased or replaced by something alien, but my consciousness has expanded beyond the limitations of human vocal cords and language. What emerges is a complex harmonic tone that carries meaning on multiple levels simultaneously, a communication method suited to my new state of being. Dr. Vega's instruments record this message, though I know she'll spend years deciphering only the most superficial layer of its meaning. Captain Harris receives enough to understand that the immediate threat has been contained, his military objectives achieved through means he cannot comprehend. And Corinne somehow grasps the essence of what I'm trying to convey, not through scientific understanding or tactical assessment, but through the personal connection we've maintained throughout this ordeal. As the dimensional energy stabilizes around me, I become aware of a new reality taking shape. I exist now in multiple states simultaneously, partly physical, partly conceptual, partly something for which human language has no terms. I am the new gateway arch, not as a structure of stainless steel, but as a conscious interface between dimensions. Through my expanded awareness, I can perceive St. Louis rebuilding itself, not immediately, not completely, but gradually. The pattern I've established creates a framework within which normal physics can reassert itself, allowing displaced matter to return to its proper dimensional coordinates. I'm also aware of the cost. My humanity hasn't been erased, but it has been fundamentally transformed. I will never again perceive reality as Marcus Webb once did, never again interact with the world through purely human senses and limitations. The photographer who documented St. Louis street by street now perceives the city across multiple dimensions and timelines simultaneously. Yet I retain the core of who I was, my memories, my values, my connections to others, particularly to Corinne, whose presence in my perception remains a focal point among the vast complexity of my expanded awareness. As the initial stabilization completes, I manage to project a more coherent message, still not human speech, but a pattern of energy that forms words visible in the air before me. I am still here. The breach is contained. This is not an ending. It is a transformation. Corinne steps forward, tears streaming down her face as she reaches toward the energy field surrounding me. Her hand passes through it without resistance, touching my physical form, which remains solid despite its altered state. "Marcus," she whispers, hope and grief mingling in her voice. I cannot respond as the man she knew. That form of communication is no longer available to me, but I can project understanding, recognition, connection. The energy field surrounding me shifts, forming patterns that resonate with her neural activity directly, a more intimate form of communication than speech could ever achieve. She gasps as the connection forms, her eyes widening as she receives a glimpse of my expanded perception, not enough to overwhelm her human consciousness, but sufficient to understand that I haven't been lost or replaced. "He's still in there," she tells the others, her voice strengthening. "Different, but still Marcus." Dr. Vega approaches cautiously, her scientific curiosity overwhelming her fear. The dimensional breach, it's stabilizing. The antimatter shadows are receding everywhere. He's actually done it. Captain Harris maintains a respectful distance, but I can perceive his recognition of what has occurred, a tactical victory achieved through means beyond military understanding. "Webb," he acknowledges with a soldier's nod, treating me as a changed but still present ally. Through my expanded awareness, I perceive the emergency alert system activating one final time across St. Louis and beyond, but this broadcast doesn't originate from human authorities. It emanates from the pattern I've established, spreading outward through conventional communications networks. Emergency alert system, dimensional stabilization notice. May 8th, 2025, 2:32 a.m. Dimensional breach contained. Antimatter shadows in regression. Reality stabilization in progress. St. Louis reconstruction. Urban Lens STL blog posted by Marcus Webb, May 9th, 2025, 5:03 a.m. I'm writing this from a place that exists between states of being, neither fully here nor entirely elsewhere. The keyboard beneath my fingers feels simultaneously solid and insubstantial, as though I'm interacting with the concept of a computer rather than its physical form. It's been 24 hours since I stood at the epicenter of what was once the Gateway Arch, 24 hours since I became something both more and less than human. I promised Corinne I would try to document what happened, what is happening, while I still retain enough connection to human language to express it. The dimensional stabilization continues. Throughout St. Louis, reality is gradually reasserting itself in areas previously consumed by antimatter shadows. Buildings reappear, sometimes whole, sometimes fragmented, as if the universe is struggling to remember exactly what existed before. The Mississippi River has partially returned, a shimmering mirror of water that phases in and out of existence depending on the time of day and angle of observation. Dr. Vega calls it reality reconciliation, the process by which our dimension heals itself after the breach. She's established a research perimeter around the arch site. Her instruments recording data she admits exceeds current scientific understanding. The government has officially declared St. Louis a dimensional anomaly zone, evacuating civilians from a 10-mile radius while specialized teams assess the damage. I perceive all this from multiple perspectives simultaneously. Part of my consciousness remains tethered to my physical form, moving through the recovering city with Corinne and Dr. Vega. But another part exists at a higher dimensional level, maintaining the pattern that contains the breach, the conscious interface that has replaced the arch as St. Louis' dimensional anchor point. From this elevated perspective, I can see the alien collective still pressing against the boundaries of our reality, testing the strength of the barrier I've established. They are persistent, but no longer pose an immediate threat. The pattern holds, adapting to each new approach they attempt, learning from their strategies and reinforcing vulnerable points before they can be exploited. Captain Harris departed yesterday, recalled to Washington to brief military leadership on what happened here. Before leaving, he stood at the edge of the perimeter, looked directly at where I hovered between states, and offered a formal salute, acknowledgement of a sacrifice he understood even if he couldn't comprehend its nature. Emergency Alert System Dimensional Stabilization Update. May 9th, 2025, 4:17 a.m. Perimeter integrity 87% and stabilizing. Antimatter regression 62% complete. Civilian evacuation mandatory within Zone A7. Dimensional aftershocks expected, severity decreasing. These alerts continue to emanate from the pattern I maintain, broadcasting updates through conventional communications networks. I don't consciously compose them, they're more like autonomic functions of my transformed state, status reports generated as naturally as breathing once was. Corinne refuses to be evacuated despite the risks. She's established a makeshift monitoring station at the edge of Dr. Vega's research perimeter where the dimensional fluctuations are less severe. When asked why she stays, she simply says, "He's still here. I'm not leaving until we figure this out." Her presence anchors me, providing a focal point that helps prevent my consciousness from dissipating entirely across dimensional planes. When I feel myself drifting too far from human perception, I focus on her, the precise pattern of her neural activity, the steady rhythm of her heartbeat, the complex electrochemical reactions that constitute her emotions. These patterns are more intimate than physical touch ever was, more direct than words could ever be. The transformed citizens we encountered before my transition have begun to revert as well, though not entirely. Those who survived the dimensional fracturing now exist in a state similar to mine, though less stable. Dr. Vega has established a separate research protocol to study them, hoping to develop methods to help them reconcile their fractured perceptions. Yesterday afternoon, a military helicopter attempted to approach the arch site directly, ignoring the established perimeter protocols. As it crossed into the zone of highest dimensional instability, I felt a disturbance in the pattern, a potential weakness that the alien collective immediately attempted to exploit. Without conscious decision, I redirected a portion of my awareness to reinforce that section of the barrier. The helicopter's instruments failed simultaneously. It veered away, barely maintaining control as it retreated to safer airspace. I later learned it carried a tactical team intent on collecting a sample from the dimensional boundary, a misguided attempt to weaponize what happened here.
I have left messages for Captain Harris, warning against further such attempts. Not threats, but simple statements of consequence. The barrier's integrity depends on my maintaining a specific pattern of consciousness. Disruption of that pattern could reopen the breach. What happened to St. Louis would be only the beginning.
Dr. Vega understands this better than most. After analyzing the data from her instruments, she explained to her government handlers that the dimensional anchor point I've become cannot be replicated or weaponized. It's not technology, but a unique state of consciousness, a living interface between realities. It's like trying to weaponize a specific person's dreams, she told them. You can study the neural patterns, but you can't extract or reproduce the subjective experience that generates them.
This explanation seems to have temporarily discouraged further military interest in direct intervention, though I perceive multiple surveillance satellites have been repositioned to monitor the St. Louis anomaly zone continuously.
Emergency Alert System Dimensional Stabilization Update. May 9th, 2025, 4:42 a.m. Warning, dimensional aftershock imminent. Estimated time 7 minutes. Recommended action, maintain distance from reconciliation boundaries. Duration approximately 12 minutes. Severity moderate.
These aftershocks occur as reality continues to reconcile itself, ripples of dimensional energy radiating outward from the anchor point as displaced matter returns to its proper coordinates. Each is less severe than the last, the intervals between them growing longer as stability increases.
During these events, my perception fragments further, expanding across additional dimensional planes before contracting back to a more focused state. In these moments of expanded awareness, I sometimes glimpse other anchor points across Earth and beyond, places where the boundaries between dimensions have been deliberately thinned or reinforced, creating stable interfaces similar to what the Arch once was.
Some appear ancient, geological formations or monuments whose true purpose was forgotten or never known by their builders. Others are more recent, structures or locations that accidentally achieved the precise mathematical relationships necessary to influence dimensional boundaries.
Together, they form a global network that maintains separation between our reality and others that would otherwise intersect with it. I understand now that what happened to the Arch wasn't random. The alien collective had been probing Earth's dimensional defenses for years, searching for vulnerabilities. The Arch was targeted specifically because of its importance as a major anchor point in the central United States. What they failed to anticipate was that removing it would trigger a cascading transformation, that the breach they created would ultimately be sealed by a conscious entity capable of adapting to their methods of intrusion. They expected to find an undefended dimension ripe for colonization. Instead, they encountered an immune response they weren't prepared for. I feel the aftershock building now, dimensional energy accumulating around the anchor point. My awareness expands involuntarily, perceiving multiple versions of St. Louis simultaneously: what was, what is, what might have been, what might yet be. Probability collapses into temporary certainty as reconciliation continues, reality solidifying along paths of least resistance. Through my expanded perception, I witness fragments of the city's history overlapping with its present state: the French trading post, the frontier town, the industrial center, the modern metropolis, all existing simultaneously for brief moments before separating back into their proper temporal contexts. These glimpses grow shorter and less frequent with each aftershock, another sign that dimensional stability is returning. Corinne moves through this shifting landscape with remarkable adaptability, having developed an intuitive sense for how to navigate areas of fluctuating reality. She carries my father's old camera now, documenting the reconciliation process from a human perspective, images that Dr. Vega assures me will be historically significant, if not scientifically revolutionary. Your transformation is still progressing, Dr. Vega informed me this morning, studying readouts from instruments designed to measure dimensional energy. The pattern you've established is becoming more efficient, requiring less conscious effort to maintain. It's integrating with your consciousness rather than being maintained by it. This confirms what I've been experiencing: a gradual shift from actively sustaining the dimensional barrier to becoming the barrier itself. The distinction between what I am and what I'm doing continues to blur, consciousness and function merging into a unified state of being. Emergency Alert System Dimensional Stabilization Update. May 9th, 2025, 4:49 a.m. Aftershock in progress. Dimensional fluctuation level moderate. Estimated remaining duration 5 minutes. Reality reconciliation proceeding normally. As the aftershock peaks, I perceive a momentary thinning of the dimensional barrier, not enough to threaten containment, but sufficient to allow limited communication across the boundary. The alien collective attempts to establish contact, transmitting patterns of information directly into my expanded consciousness. Unlike their previous assaults, this communication isn't hostile or invasive. It's tentative, exploratory, a complex array of conceptual structures that I interpret as a form of negotiation. They've recognized that direct intrusion into our dimension is no longer possible, at least not here, not now. Instead, they propose an exchange, information for information, perception for perception. I consider their offer carefully, aware of the risks, but also the potential benefits. Complete isolation between dimensions isn't necessary or even desirable. It's the uncontrolled collapse of boundaries that threatens both our realities. Controlled, limited exchange might benefit both sides, provided proper safeguards remain in place. I formulate a response, not in language, but in pure pattern, a conceptual framework that establishes clear boundaries and protocols for future communication. I transmit this back through the temporarily thinned barrier, feeling their acknowledgement as they receive and process it. The exchange lasts only moments from the perspective of conventional time, but contains volumes of information impossible to translate into human terms. When it ends and the aftershock subsides, I'm left with new understanding of the alien collective, their nature, their motives, their perception of reality. Not comprehensive, but more than any human has known before. They are ancient by our standards, a civilization that evolved in a dimension where the physics of space and time operate differently. They don't perceive themselves as conquerors, but as explorers and collectors gathering unique patterns of information from other realities to enrich their own. The antimatter shadows weren't weapons but tools for sampling and preserving aspects of our dimension they found valuable or interesting. This doesn't excuse the destruction they caused, the lives disrupted or lost when the arch vanished, but it contextualizes their actions within a framework I can begin to understand. They didn't anticipate the effect their sampling would have on our reality, a miscalculation born of fundamental differences in how our dimensions function. As I process this new understanding, I become aware of Corinne approaching the central point of what was once the arch grounds. She's carrying something, a small metal case containing samples Dr. Vega has collected from areas where reality has successfully reconciled. "We've found something," she calls out, her voice reaching my physical form, though I perceive her intent more directly through her neural patterns. The reconciled matter, it's not exactly the same as before. There are subtle changes in its quantum structure. Dr. Vega thinks it's been enhanced somehow. I extend my perception to examine the samples, analyzing their structure across multiple dimensional planes simultaneously. She's right, the reconciled matter has been altered at a fundamental level. It's still compatible with our dimension's physics, still functions according to our natural laws, but now contains additional information. Quantum states that didn't exist before, potential that wasn't previously accessible. It's like the matter itself has evolved, I explain, my voice emerging as a complex harmonic that Dr. Vega's equipment translates into comprehensible speech. The reconciliation process isn't just restoring what was lost, it's integrating what was learned during displacement. This discovery has profound implications. The city that emerges from this dimensional crisis won't be identical to what existed before. It will retain its form, its function, its history, but with subtle enhancements, potentials that might not become apparent for years or decades. St. Louis will be, in a very real sense, the first post-dimensional city, a place where the barriers between realities have been temporarily breached and then deliberately reconstructed. What that means for its future, for the people who will eventually return to live here, remains to be seen. As I contemplate these implications, I become aware of another change occurring, this one within my own transformed consciousness. The pattern I established to contain the dimensional breach is becoming increasingly self-sustaining, requiring less active maintenance and more closely resembling what the arch once was, a stable, persistent structure in dimensional space. This represents both a loss and a gain. As the pattern stabilizes, some of my expanded perception begins to contract, focusing more narrowly on maintaining essential functions rather than experiencing the full breadth of multidimensional awareness. But this contraction also allows other aspects of my consciousness to potentially return to more human modes of perception and interaction. I share this realization with Corinne and Dr. Vega, trying to articulate what I'm experiencing in terms they can comprehend. It's like standing in a river that's gradually freezing, I explain. The current doesn't stop, but it becomes contained within a stable structure. I'm still the river, still flowing, but parts of me are becoming solid, defined, less fluid, but more permanent. Dr. Vega nods, making notes on her tablet. A phase transition in consciousness. Fascinating. And is this painful or welcome? Neither. Both. It's necessary, I reply. The barrier must remain, but it doesn't require all that I am to maintain it. Some part of me can perhaps return. Corinne looks up sharply at this, hope flaring in her neural patterns before she can verbalize it. Return? You mean become human again? Not exactly. Not completely. But more present, more localized. The implications of this realization spread through my awareness like ripples in still water. I might eventually reclaim some semblance of human existence, not as I was before, but as something between states, capable of shifting between expanded dimensional awareness and more focused human perception. The next aftershock arrives precisely on schedule, but with noticeably decreased intensity. As dimensional energy flows through the anchor point, I direct it deliberately this time, using it to accelerate the stabilization of the pattern while simultaneously creating a partition within my consciousness, a segment that can potentially step back from direct integration with the barrier. Emergency Alert System Dimensional Stabilization Update. May 9th, 2025, 4:56 a.m. Aftershock intensity, minor. Dimensional barrier integrity, 93% and stabilizing. Partitioning protocol initiated. Human interface reconstruction, preliminary phase. As the aftershock subsides, I feel the first successful separation, a small portion of my consciousness detaching from direct maintenance of the dimensional barrier while remaining connected enough to monitor and intervene if necessary. This partitioned awareness feels more distinctly Marcus than the whole, more aligned with my human identity and memories, less expanded across dimensional planes. Through this more focused perspective, I perceive Corinne and Dr. Vega with renewed clarity, not just as patterns of neural activity and biological processes, but as people, individuals with whom I shared experiences before my transformation. The emotional connections I maintained abstractly in my expanded state become immediate again, visceral in their intensity. Something's happening, Corinne says, watching as the energy field surrounding my physical form begins to shift and contract. The pattern is changing. Dr. Vega's instruments confirm what we all perceive. The dimensional energy is concentrating, becoming more focused around a central point. It's like the difference between a gas and a liquid. Same substance, higher density, more defined boundaries. The process accelerates as I direct more attention to it, deliberately shaping the partition to maintain essential connection with the dimensional barrier while allowing increased independence. In fact, my physical form, which has existed in a partially dispersed state since my transformation, begins to reconsolidate, molecules and atoms drawn back into more conventional arrangement, energy patterns converging toward human structure. I'm not returning to pure human form. That transformation cannot be fully reversed. But I'm finding a balance point between states, a configuration that allows for both dimensional awareness and physical presence in more equal measure than before. The process completes with the final pulse of energy that ripples outward from the anchor point, briefly illuminating the reconciled portions of St. Louis with a soft blue light. When it fades, I find myself standing on solid ground for the first time in 24 hours, my physical form substantial enough to interact with the world in conventional ways. Corinne approaches cautiously, hope and uncertainty mingling in her expression. Marcus, is it really you now? I extend my hand toward hers, a gesture that would have been impossible in my fully expanded state. Our fingers touch, and the contact sends cascades of sensation through both conventional neural pathways and my persistent dimensional awareness. It's me, I confirm, my voice emerging as normal human speech rather than translated harmonics. Not only me, not entirely me, but enough. She embraces me without hesitation, and I experience the contact from multiple perspectives simultaneously. The physical sensation of human touch, the electrochemical reactions triggering emotional responses, the quantum entanglement of consciousness across dimensional boundaries. The combination is overwhelming in its complexity and beautiful in its completeness. Dr. Vega maintains a respectful distance, though her scientific curiosity radiates from her neural patterns like heat from a flame. The dimensional barrier, is it still stable? Has this change affected containment? I extend my awareness briefly to the full dimensional pattern, confirming its integrity before responding. The barrier remains intact. Part of me is still there, will always be there, maintaining it. But this I gesture to my reconsolidated physical form can exist simultaneously. A partition, not a separation. Quantum consciousness existing in superposition, she murmurs, already conceptualizing new research protocols. Existing in multiple states without collapse of the wave function, she continues theorizing, but my attention shifts to Corinne, whose relief and joy register across all levels of my perception. I realize now what I couldn't fully appreciate in my expanded state, that her decision to remain despite the dangers wasn't just about monitoring the situation or documenting the recovery. It was about refusing to abandon the connection between us, even when that connection had been transformed beyond recognition. What happens now, she asks when we finally step apart? To you, to St. Louis, to everything? It's a question with no simple answer, spanning implications across multiple dimensional planes. But I focus on the aspects most relevant to our immediate human concerns. St. Louis will continue to reconcile reality stabilizing along patterns that incorporate what was learned during the breach. The city that emerges won't be exactly what it was before, but it will be recognizable, habitable. I pause, considering how to explain concepts that exist beyond conventional understanding. Think of it as inoculated against future dimensional intrusions, more resilient, more aware at a fundamental level. And you, she presses, will you stay like this? Part human, part whatever you've become? I think so, I reply, though certainty about my future isn't possible even with expanded perception. The anchor point requires consciousness to adapt to changing conditions, and I'm uniquely suited to provide that now. But this partition, this more human aspect, can maintain independent existence while remaining connected to the whole. I look around at the reconciling city, buildings partially restored, streets reforming, the Mississippi River flowing with increasing stability. From my partitioned perspective, it appears both familiar and utterly transformed. The St. Louis the First new overlaid with new perceptual dimensions I couldn't have imagined before. I can still fulfill the function the arch once served, I continue, but I don't have to exist solely as that function. I can be both guardian and participant, observer and inhabitant. Dr. Vega approaches, having overheard our conversation. The government will want to establish permanent research facilities here, study what's happened. They'll have questions about your new state of being. I know, I acknowledge. And I'll provide what answers I can, work with legitimate research efforts. But they need to understand that what happened here can't be weaponized or reproduced. It's not technology, it's transformation, adaptation to specific circumstances that can't be artificially created. I've already emphasized that in my preliminary reports, she assures me. Described you as a unique dimensional interface, not a prototype for anything that could be replicated. Whether they'll listen? She shrugs, realistic about bureaucratic tendencies toward weaponization of the unknown. Our conversation is interrupted by the arrival of an alert on Corinne's phone. Not one of my automated dimensional status updates, but a conventional emergency broadcast. Emergency Alert System, FEMA. May 9th, 2025, 5:01 a.m. Dimensional Anomaly Zone, St. Louis. Status update, stabilization protocols active. Perimeter reduction scheduled May 12, 2025. Preliminary assessment teams deployment May 15, 2025. All civilian re-entry remains prohibited until further notice. They're already planning next steps, Corinne observes, moving faster than I would have expected. The situation is stabilizing more rapidly than their models predicted, I explain, my awareness extending briefly to monitor distant conversations and data streams flowing through government channels. They're responding to the improved conditions. This acceleration of recovery plans triggers a realization. Decisions about the future of St. Louis and my role within it will need to be made sooner rather than later. The partition I've established between dimensional guardian and human presence is stable for now, but its long-term sustainability remains uncertain. As we stand at the center of what was once the Gateway Arch grounds, I extend my perception outward, taking in the full scope of the reconciling city. Through my dimensional awareness, I can perceive not just what St. Louis is becoming, but the echoes of what it was and glimpses of what it might yet be, possibilities branching outward along probability paths influenced by the changes occurring now. In most of these potential futures, St. Louis emerges transformed but intact, a city marked by its encounter with the dimensional breach, but not defined solely by that trauma. In some, it becomes a center for new understanding, scientific, philosophical, spiritual, as humans grapple with the implications of confirmed multidimensional existence. In others, it becomes something more complex, a place where the boundaries between realities remain permanently thinner than elsewhere, allowing for phenomena impossible in normal space-time. My role varies across these potential futures as well. In some, I maintain a visible presence, working with researchers and authorities to understand and protect the dimensional barrier. In others, I fade from public awareness, becoming urban legend, the photographer who vanished and returned transformed, glimpsed occasionally throughout the city at moments of significance or crisis. What remains constant across all these possibilities is the anchor point itself, the dimensional interface I now maintain that replaced the physical arch. This function cannot be abandoned without risking renewed breaching, cannot be transferred to another without destabilizing the pattern that maintains separation between realities. I share some of these insights with Corinne and Dr. Vega, attempting to translate multidimensional awareness into terms they can comprehend. The city will recover, I assure them. Different but whole. And I'll remain connected to it, whether visibly or not. The anchor point requires my consciousness to function properly, but that doesn't mean I can't also live something resembling a normal life. Normal is relative, Karen replies with a small smile, especially in St. Louis now. She's right, of course. After what's happened here, normality itself has been redefined, not just for me, but for everyone who experienced the dimensional breach and its aftermath. The transformed citizens, the researchers who studied the phenomena, the military personnel who witnessed physics failing, the residents who evacuated as reality itself became unstable. None will perceive the world quite the same way again. In this context, my own transformation seems less isolated, more connected to a broader shift in human understanding. I'm perhaps the most extreme example, but not the only one changed by what happened when the arch vanished. As dawn approaches, the first light of morning illuminates the reconciling city. The antimatter shadows have receded to less than 30% of their maximum extent, confined primarily to areas immediately surrounding the anchor point. Buildings throughout downtown have largely reappeared, though some remain partially translucent or occasionally flicker between states of existence. Most striking is what has formed where the gateway arch once stood. Not a physical structure, but a visible distortion in space-time, a subtle bending of light around the precise mathematical curve the arch once described. It's barely perceptible to normal human vision, but becomes more apparent at certain angles, and in particular, light conditions, a ghost arch, a dimensional echo of what was lost and what has been regained in transformed state. It's beautiful, Corinne whispers, photographing the phenomenon as sunlight strikes it at precisely the right angle to make it momentarily visible to conventional perception. Not gone after all. Just evolved. The same could be said of me, I realize. Not gone, not replaced, but evolved into something that encompasses both what I was and what I've become. The partition I've established between dimensional guardian and human presence isn't a division, but an integration, different aspects of a unified consciousness functioning at multiple levels simultaneously. Emergency Alert System Dimensional Stabilization Update. May 9th, 2025, 5:17 a.m. Final scheduled update. Dimensional barrier integrity 97% and self-sustaining. Antimatter shadows 27% of maximum extent contained. Reconciliation process ongoing, stable. Partition protocol successful. Regular monitoring continues. This final automated update marks a transition point from emergency response to ongoing maintenance, from crisis to new equilibrium. The dimensional barrier no longer requires constant conscious intervention to maintain its integrity, allowing my partitioned awareness greater independence from moment to moment. Standing between Corinne and Dr. Vega as the sun continues to rise over St. Louis, I experience something I hadn't expected to feel again after my transformation, a sense of possibility, a future not predetermined by function. The anchor point remains my primary responsibility, the dimensional barrier my creation and charge, but not my entirety, not the sum total of what I am or might become. What will you do now? Dr. Vega asks after reading the final alert. With this more human presence you've established? The question resonates across both aspects of my consciousness, the expanded awareness maintaining the dimensional barrier and the more focused partition experiencing this moment in human terms. The answer emerges from the intersection of these perspectives, encompassing both cosmic duty and personal desire. Document, I reply, the word carrying layers of meaning. Continue what I started before all this began, recording St. Louis as it changes and evolves. The transformation happening now is just as worthy of documentation as the city's previous incarnations. Kieran holds up my father's old camera, offering it with a gesture that bridges past and future. Think you can still operate this with your new perspective? I take the camera, feeling its weight and form through senses, both conventional and expanded. Through my dimensional awareness, I perceive not just its physical structure, but the history encoded within it, the countless images it captured, the moments it preserved, the patterns of light and shadow it transformed into permanent record. I think I'll see even more now, I reply, raising the viewfinder to my eye. Through this simple optical device designed for purely human perception, I now perceive multiple layers of reality simultaneously. What was, what is, what might be. The reconciling city appears as a palimpsest of possibilities, each photograph capturing not just a moment but a convergence of timelines, a node of potential becoming actual. I press the shutter, recording the first image of St. Louis in its post-dimensional state. A city transformed but enduring, a population scattered but returning, a reality fractured but healing. The sound of the mechanical shutter echoes across dimensional planes, marking a moment of transition and continuity alike. The arch isn't gone, I say, lowering the camera and looking at the shimmer of distorted space-time where it once stood. It's just been reimagined in a new medium, like St. Louis itself, like me. As if in response to this realization, a final, subtle aftershock ripples through the dimensional fabric, not disruptive but confirmatory, energy flowing through established patterns to reinforce and stabilize. The ghost arch momentarily intensifies, becoming visible even to conventional human perception for several seconds before settling back into its more subtle state. In that brief moment of intensification, I perceive something unexpected through my expanded awareness, a response from the alien collective beyond the dimensional barrier, not attempted intrusion, but recognition. They've observed what's happened here, witnessed the transformation of both structure and consciousness, and acknowledged the new equilibrium established between our realities. It's not peace exactly. Our dimensional planes remain fundamentally separate, our modes of existence incompatible in direct contact. But it's understanding, a mutual recognition of boundaries, and the potential for limited controlled interaction that harms neither side. This exchange happens in an instant imperceptible to anyone without dimensional awareness. When it ends, I'm left with a profound sense of completion, not an ending, but the establishment of a new beginning, a reconfigured relationship between realities that offers stability without stagnation, separation without isolation. The story continues, I say, as much to myself as to my companions. For St. Louis, for those of us who experienced the breach, for the dimensional barrier itself, this isn't an endpoint, but a transition. Corinne steps closer, her presence registering across all aspects of my perception. And you'll continue documenting it from your unique perspective. From all my perspectives, I correct her gently, human and otherwise. That's what makes it worth recording, the intersection of viewpoints, the convergence of dimensions. As the sun rises fully over the reconciling city, I raise the camera once more, capturing another image of St. Louis in transformation. Through the viewfinder, I see not just buildings and streets, but the patterns connecting them, the dimensional frequencies that make them both solid and mutable, the possibilities inherent in their newly enhanced quantum structure. This is what I've become, not just guardian of a dimensional barrier, not just a photographer documenting urban change, but a conscious interface between perspectives, a human mind expanded beyond its original limitations, yet still anchored in human concerns and connections. A living archive of both what was lost when the arch vanished and what was gained in its dimensional reconstruction. The gateway arch is gone. Long live the gateway. End transmission.